71 years ago, a 2-year-old girl vanished right in front of her own home in Maryland, disappearing without a trace in just a few minutes, leaving her family shattered and without any explanation. Authorities suspected it was simply a case of a child wandering off, and when no body or any reliable clues were found, the investigation quickly stalled. However, through all those years, a desperate mother never gave up hope, still clinging to the slim chance that her daughter was alive somewhere. Then one day, while reviewing old documents preserved for decades, she noticed an important detail that every previous investigator had overlooked. A detail powerful enough to turn the entire case upside down in a way no one could have imagined. Before diving deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Maryland, in 1954, a suburban neighborhood in Baltimore County, operated with the steady rhythm of a working-class community. Men left home early for the docks and factories. Women took care of the housework. Children played freely in the yards, and the high level of safety meant people were rarely on guard. The Sanders family lived in a small house at the end of the row. Thomas was a dock worker preparing for the morning shift. Margaret was a stay-at-home mom. Their daughter Lily, a lively and friendly 2-year-old, often sat on the front steps playing with her box of colorful chalk. Helen Whitford, the 17-year-old girl living next door, often watched Lily for Margaret, was there that morning and chatting over the fence while Thomas got ready to leave. While Lily played with chalk near the door and Margaret tidied the yard, Helen noticed a strange woman at the end of the street standing still for a few minutes, looking toward the Sanders house before quickly walking away without greeting anyone. A few minutes later, a green Ford drove slowly down the street once, then turned around and came back a second time, maintaining an unusually steady speed that didn't match the typical movement of local residents. Helen noticed but wasn't sure if it was suspicious. Margaret glanced over but, trusting the neighborhood's safety, didn't think much of it. Thomas left for work. Margaret went inside to get a cloth for Lily, taking only about 2 to 3 minutes. When she came back out, Margaret didn't see Lily on the steps. Helen also didn't see the little girl run into her yard. The two called Lily's name but got no response. Helen checked around the front yard, looking in the bushes and on the steps. Margaret ran around to the back, checking the shed and calling for Lily with growing anxiety. When they found no trace, Margaret knocked on every door in the row, asking if anyone had seen Lily pass by. Thomas was urgently called back from the docks. The initial reaction from the family and neighbors was to assume Lily had wandered off somewhere in the neighborhood. They split up for a spontaneous search, expanding to backyards, fences, lawns, and hidden corners. The rush of people searching disrupted the area around the steps and walkways. A boy living 2 houses down said he thought he saw someone carrying a child toward the end of the street, but he wasn't sure and couldn't clearly describe who was carrying her. In the first hour after discovering Lily was missing, the search was chaotic, unorganized, without any specific direction, and yielded no results. As the morning light grew brighter, and searches in nearby areas turned up no sign of Lily, Thomas stood by the telephone table in the living room, picked up the receiver, and called the police, reporting that his daughter had disappeared and the family couldn't find her. At the Baltimore County Police Department's dispatch center, Thomas Sanders' call was received early in the morning shift. The dispatcher on duty recorded the initial information per procedure: the caller's name, address, the victim's age, and the last time she was seen. He provided a brief description of Lily, the circumstances of her disappearance, and details that the family and neighbors had already searched the area but found no sign of where she might have gone. The dispatcher asked several standard questions to assess immediate risk: whether Lily had a habit of running into the street, if she had ever wandered off before, or if there were any family disputes involving custody. Based on the family's information, the call was classified as a missing child in a residential area, medium priority, with no direct signs of violence or intrusion. The dispatch unit preliminarily assessed the situation as likely the child leaving her spot on her own or following a familiar person, unrecognized by the family, with no basis yet to activate child abduction protocols, which required clearer evidence of coercion. or an identifiable suspect. Dispatch created an initial file, forwarded the information to the nearest patrol unit with instructions to go to the scene for on-site verification, and sent an internal alert about a missing child in the residential area without escalating the alert level. 2 patrol officers were assigned the task immediately after receiving the report. They were given Lily's description, the Sanders home location, and details that the family had searched before calling. En route to the scene, they checked the call management system for any reports around the same time or area involving a lost child, suspicious persons, or unusual vehicles, but nothing related came up. The preliminary assessment remained high likelihood the child wandered off a short distance or was taken to another nearby home by a passerby without reporting it yet. The patrol unit's initial task was to approach the family, observe the scene directly, confirm the urgency level, and decide whether to escalate notifications or mobilize support. As the patrol car turned onto the street leading to the Sanders home, the missing person report was still being handled under procedures for young children with no signs of crime, and initiating the next steps depended entirely on the on-site evaluation by the 2 dispatched officers. When the 2 patrol officers parked in front of the Sanders home, they quickly observed the street situation before heading straight up the walkway to the front steps, where Margaret and several neighbors were standing in a small group with tense faces. After introducing themselves and their task and approaching Margaret to verify information, they asked her to describe as precisely as possible the last time Lily was seen. Margaret said, "Lily was playing on the steps a few minutes before she went inside to get a cloth, and when she came back out, her daughter was gone." Helen was also questioned to cross-reference the timeline. She confirmed a similar time frame, stating that for about 2 to 3 minutes, no one was directly watching Lily. The officers noted the disappearance window with minimal variance to pinpoint the most likely time Lily left her initial spot. They then observed the scene directly and quickly realized the area had been significantly disturbed. Multiple different shoe prints on the dirt in front of the steps, walkways trampled over repeatedly, bushes pushed apart, and children's toys moved without clear order. The neighbors' involvement in searching before police arrived had destroyed or made indistinguishable any potential traces of Lily's movement or someone who might have carried her away from the adult search activity. The 2 officers noted this in their notebooks, marking the scene as no longer intact, and asked everyone to temporarily stop moving in the immediate area around the steps so they could observe more systematically. Next, they proceeded with a close radius sweep per procedure for missing children in residential areas. 1 officer checked the left side of the house, including the backyard trash area, small shed and wooden fence, separating it from the neighbor's yard. The other checked the right side, covering the row of bushes, side path to the road, and area under the porch. They looked for signs Lily had crawled into tight spaces, gotten stuck behind bushes, or fallen into any low spots within a child's view. During the sweep, they asked everyone to describe the routes neighbors had already searched to identify undisturbed areas. However, most participants were unsure where they had gone or couldn't recall specific spots checked, making it difficult to reconstruct a search map. After completing the first check, both officers confirmed no evidence Lily had moved far from the steps on her own. No intact small footprints, no toy pieces, no vegetation pushed aside in a child's direction, and no sounds or responses when they called Lily's name nearby. They expanded to the area near the road edge, observing the grass, curb, and distance from the steps to where it could lead to the main street, but found no signs Lily had run to the road or turned toward another house unseen. Again, the overlapping adult shoe prints made identifying child traces impossible. Finishing the full close-range check around the home, the 2 officers noted the scene provided no direct evidence of criminal activity, nor clear physical evidence of conflict or resistance. From the on-site assessment, they could only conclude Lily was no longer in direct view, but the cause of her disappearance could not yet be determined based on the disturbed scene and information gathered at this stage. After completing the check around the home, without finding any direct signs related to Lily, the 2 officers moved to collecting witness statements from those present during the time she vanished. The first they approached was Helen Whitford, as she was closest to Lily at the time and likely had the clearest view from her yard. Helen said she was only a few meters from Lily, saw her playing with chalk and drawing on the steps, but her attention was drawn to a woman standing at the end of the street. Helen stated the woman wore a light blue coat, had shoulder-length hair, stood motionless for about a minute, then quickly left in an unclear direction. When asked for more details, Helen admitted she only glanced and couldn't see the face clearly. The distance and bright sunlight prevented any specific identifying features. Regarding the disappearance timing, Helen could only provide a relative time frame, saying she looked up after the woman left and realized Lily was no longer in her spot. Next, the officers approached the 8-year-old boy, living 2 houses down, mentioned in Margaret's initial account. The boy said, while riding his bike at the end of the street, he thought he saw someone carrying a child, but couldn't describe if it was a man or woman, and wasn't sure if the child was Lily. When asked about clothing colors or the direction the person went, the boy seemed confused, saying the image passed quickly, and he didn't pay attention because he thought it was normal in a neighborhood with many young children. The officers recorded this statement, but assessed its reliability as low due to the boy's uncertainty and inability to provide specific details directly linking it to the disappearance. The next witness was the newspaper delivery man, who passed through the neighborhood that morning around the time Lily was on the steps. He said he saw a green Ford drive slowly down the street twice in a short time. When asked if he saw anyone in the car or unusual behavior, he replied he couldn't clearly see the driver, or if anyone else was inside. He only remembered the car was slower than usual, not matching local residents' habits. He also didn't see any children or adults near the car, and had no reason to think it was related, so he didn't pay further attention. The 2 officers noted all the information and compiled it for comparison, trying to find intersections between statements. However, cross-referencing showed each lacked clear verification. Helen saw a strange woman but couldn't describe her face. The boy thought he saw someone carrying a child, but wasn't sure. The delivery man saw a slow car but no specific behavior tied to Lily. No statement provided a strong enough identification to establish a suspect, nor any definitive details about Lily's movement or who might have taken her. The timing of what witnesses saw didn't fully align, creating unverifiable gaps. When the officers tried to sequence events based on accounts, no data was clear enough for a solid assumption. The woman in blue wasn't seen interacting with Lily. The boy couldn't identify the carrier. The green Ford wasn't witnessed stopping or approaching the steps. The fragmented information made prioritizing directions nearly impossible on site. They noted in the report that initial statements were supportive only, not directional evidence, and confirmed no witness directly saw Lily being taken from the steps. With the statement's lack of specificity, police concluded current data wasn't enough to determine the incident's nature, and all possibilities remained open without prioritizing any hypothesis. After completing the first round of witness statements without obtaining clear enough data to direct the case, the 2 officers decided to proceed with the next step in residential missing child procedure, expanding the search in the closed radius to determine if Lily had moved away from the steps into less noticed spots. They asked those gathered in front of the Sanders home to stay put, to avoid further disturbing the surrounding area, then divided the check zones by direction. One officer started on the left side of the house, walking along the path to the backyard, checking the manhole in front of the gate, drain covers and gaps underneath. The manhole was opened and checked with a flashlight, but inside showed no foreign objects, steady water flow, and no slide marks or small clothing pieces. The left path led to the backyard connected to a small shed and old wooden fence. The officer checked each fence section for pushes or widening, but the entire structure was intact, with no gaps a 2-year-old could easily slip through without noise. Meanwhile, the other officer checked the right side, where there were bushes and a small trail to the neighbor's yard. He shone a light into each space under the bushes, looking for disturbed soil, but the ground only showed adult shoe prints over soft dirt from prior neighbor searches. The trail to the neighbors led to a wide grassy area where children often played, but no distinct small footprints or ones matching Lily's size. The 2 officers conferred briefly, then expanded to the path behind the row of houses, connecting to a small road to the neighborhood parking area. They swept the full length, observing the ground, small turns, and soil gaps for prints. But all had been trampled multiple times that morning by searching adults, making child footprints nearly impossible to identify. They continued to the backyards of the two adjacent homes. Homeowners let police check sheds, tool corners, old wood piles, and planting areas. No signs Lily had passed or gotten stuck anywhere. Officers noted each checked area yielded no movement direction, physical evidence, sounds, or signals suggesting Lily left the steps on foot. They then checked the road along the street curb, observing pavement, grass near the sidewalk, gravel near flower beds for small footprints or drag marks, but surfaces were disrupted by residents arriving to help search after the disappearance was discovered. Grass sections were flattened without layered prints, typical of a small child passing without major disturbance. Expanding to the front yards of two opposite homes, officers still found no signs Lily had left the steps and moved on her own. All they observed was the result of neighbors moving in multiple directions, erasing potential traces. After nearly an hour sweeping the close radius, checking natural hazards like drains, soil gaps, rickety steps, and blind spots like under porches, wall recesses, and fence gaps, the two officers confirmed no small child footprints, no items Lily left behind, and no clear direction. The temporary report conclusion was that close radius search yielded no signals to narrow the area, and all priority points had been checked at least once without any leads. This was considered the first failure in locating Lily, making assessing the disappearance cause even harder as time passed without new data from the vicinity. As the search expanding the radius neared its end, without yielding any signs that Lily had moved away from the porch on her own, the two police officers returned to focus on observing the initial starting area with the goal of re-examining every small detail they might have missed, while the neighborhood still had many people coming and going. The porch remained the central point of the incident, and although the area had been significantly disturbed by the spontaneous search activities, the police decided to conduct a re-inspection of each step, the edge of the yard, and the area adjacent to the walkway leading to the street. They used flashlights to shine into the small crevices under the steps, under the flower beds, and the gaps where low bushes obscured the view, trying to find any detail that remained intact before the neighbors moved around too much. When one officer approached the edge of the yard next to the walkway to the street, he discovered a small object lying right at the edge of the grass, near the area bordering the gravel part of the curb. It was one of the items Lily often carried when playing, a small bracelet made of bright-colored plastic beads that Margaret confirmed belonged to her daughter. Although the bracelet was not too far from the porch, it was far enough from the steps to make this location noteworthy, because Lily rarely went as far as the edge of the road on her own without an adult accompanying her. When the police asked Margaret about Lily's habits, she affirmed that the little girl rarely stepped all the way down the walkway without permission, and if she did move, it was only a few steps right in front of the door. In particular, the bracelet was always on Lily's wrist when she went out to play in the morning, so its solitary appearance near the edge of the road raised questions about the process of movement from when Lily was still standing on the porch steps to when the item fell to the ground. The police continued to examine the area around where the bracelet was found, but did not find any other items, no small child's footprints, or signs that Lily had walked in that direction on her own. Instead, the entire surface of the soil and grass was crisscrossed with adult shoe prints from the neighbors during the chaotic time when they were searching in the first hours. The absence of any signs of Lily's movement within the range from the porch to the spot where the bracelet was found led the police to consider the possibility that the item did not fall from Lily running on her own, but might have fallen while she was being carried away from the porch. One officer recalled the unclear statement from the 8-year-old boy about seeing someone carrying a child, and although this statement lacked high credibility, it became more relevant when the evidence was in a position that a 2-year-old child would have difficulty reaching without anyone seeing. The police proceeded to cordon off a small area around where the bracelet was discovered, searching for indentations in the soil, skid marks, or any signs that someone had stood or moved there recently, but the ground had been completely disturbed by the prior search activities. Nevertheless, the distance from the porch steps to where the bracelet fell still created an important anomaly in the initial assessment. If Lily had run to the edge of the yard, she would hardly have dropped the bracelet without leaving any other signs, and the lack of any movement traces made the hypothesis that she was lifted off the ground by an adult begin to carry more weight. When asking Margaret again whether Lily ever removed the bracelet or dropped it while playing, she affirmed that she had never seen such a situation. The bracelet was very light, but Lily always kept it on her wrist, and if it had fallen right near the porch steps, it was likely that someone in the house or Helen would have seen it earlier. The fact that the bracelet appeared at a point farther than usual indicated that it fell under circumstances different from Lily's natural movement habits. After recording the exact location, the police used gloves to pick up the item and placed it into an evidence bag, according to the procedures at that time, along with a note about the disturbed state of the grass. They briefly discussed with each other how finding the bracelet changed the severity of the case. From assessing it as a child wandering off on her own, there now emerged a factor suggesting that Lily might have been moved by someone else without leaving clear traces on the ground. Although they could not conclude immediately, the appearance of an item closely associated with the child in a position inconsistent with normal movement behavior forced the two officers to note the possibility that Lily was carried away from the porch area rather than moving on her own. This was the first time that morning that they had to consider that the cause of the disappearance might not simply be a child getting lost, but involved the intervention of an adult at a moment when no one was watching. After discovering Lily's bracelet at the edge of the yard and noting the possibility that she might have been carried away rather than moving on her own, the two police officers realized the need to expand the evaluation to those living near the Sanders home to rule out the possibility that someone in the neighborhood was directly or indirectly involved in Lily's disappearance. They began compiling a list of residents in the closest radius, including the households next door on both sides, the families across the street, and some houses at the end of the block, totaling 26 people who were present or living in the area at the time that morning. The list was organized based on the house locations relative to the Sanders porch, prioritizing those with doors or windows that could observe the direction in which Lily disappeared or who had paths that passed through the area. The first family investigated was the Whitfords, since Helen had been closest to Lily in the time frame when the little girl disappeared. The police asked more about the other family members, confirming that Helen's parents were both inside the house at the time of the incident, and both appeared when Helen called them after realizing Lily was missing. The timing matched other witnesses in the area, and there were no signs that anyone in the Whitford house had left during the short period when Lily was unobserved. With no points of suspicion, the entire Whitford family was removed from the initial list. The second person examined was Mr. Harris, a man living alone 2 houses away from the Sanders. He usually left home early in the morning to go to the auto repair shop where he worked. The police asked him about the time he left the house that day. He said he had left before Lily came out to the porch, and his colleagues could confirm he was at the garage at opening time. When checking the information with other neighbors, the statement was consistent. Many people confirmed seeing him drive his small pickup truck off the street early, without returning during the time Lily disappeared. Although he was often misunderstood because he lived alone, the matching alibi evidence led the police to remove him from suspicion. The third person investigated was Mrs. Ellis, living right at the corner of the block, who sometimes babysat for a few families in the neighborhood. Since her house had a door facing the intersection at the end of the street, where some witnesses noticed a stranger that morning, the police considered the possibility that she might have seen or had contact with Lily. She said she had been inside the house all morning, doing laundry, and did not know about the incident until hearing the noise from the Sanders direction. When the police asked if she had ever seen the woman in blue described by Helen, Mrs. Ellis said no, and no one had visited her house during that time. Her information was confirmed by neighbors across the street, who stated they saw her moving around the house through the kitchen window. Although she had a favorable position to observe the intersection, she provided no information to narrow down the suspicion, and there was no reason to suspect her involvement in Lily's disappearance. The fourth examined was the Willard family, living in the house directly across. They had 2 young children who often played in the yard on weekends, but that morning, both were at school. The parents stated they left the house after Lily disappeared, only hearing about the incident from neighbors when they returned home at noon. No one in the Willard family was near the area when Lily went missing, so they were quickly removed from the evaluation scope. During the interviews, the police noted additional names in the neighborhood, but most were not home that morning or had alibis from family members. A few households also provided information about their schedules and daily habits, helping the police establish a preliminary picture of those who might have been near the disappearance location in the brief period between when Margaret went inside and Helen looked back at the porch. However, when cross-referencing all the statements, no individual had unusual behavior, mismatched schedules, or adverse descriptions that would make them a real suspect. Some people admitted seeing the green Ford driving slowly through the street, but no one saw it stop, no one saw anyone get out of the car, and no one confirmed that the woman in blue had contact with any residents in the neighborhood. All the information provided remained within the scope of scattered observations, lacking a connection to Lily. When summarizing the initial screening list, the 2 police officers realized that although the neighborhood was quite populated, none of them had a clear motive, none had a favorable position to approach Lily in those few minutes without being seen by other witnesses, and no statement was strong enough to suggest internal suspicion. The 3 people examined most closely, Helen for being near Lily, Mr. Harris for living alone and leaving early in the morning, Mrs. Ellis for being near the intersection, were all cleared after basic verification. No new leads emerged from the group of residents near the house. The statements only repeated what was already known, without opening up any clear hypothesis. The neighborhood, which had been seen as the most likely place to find initial signs, now provided no data to narrow down the suspicion, leaving the determination of the origin of Lily's disappearance at a level that could not be explained from within the block. After screening the neighborhood residents without identifying any individual capable of accessing Lily in the short time leading to her disappearance, the 2 police officers shifted their attention to the only detail in the witness statements that could relate to an external factor from outside the neighborhood, the green Ford car seen driving slowly through the street twice that morning. Although the newspaper delivery person's statement did not include a license plate or a clear description of the driver, the repetition of this vehicle in the time close to when Lily disappeared led the police to view this as a point needing verification. They noted the preliminary description, a Ford from the early 1950s, light green standard size, with no special identifying marks besides the unusually slow speed. In the neighborhood, no one claimed ownership or had seen this car before, which made it even more of an external element needing checking. When the report about the car was sent to the police department's administrative division to conduct a quick lookup in the DMV database, the results returned a long list of hundreds of owners of green Ford cars in the entire county and surrounding areas, as this car model was common and the color was not distinctive enough to narrow the scope quickly. Each license plate in the list was recorded by the support team, categorized by registration area and proximity to the neighborhood where Lily disappeared. However, without a specific license plate provided by witnesses, all data filtering efforts could only rely on geographic distance and vehicle model, resulting in a list that was still too broad to process thoroughly in a short time. While reviewing this list, one license plate from the area on the edge of Baltimore County appeared with a vehicle description most closely matching the statement, a green Ford, corresponding year, registered under the name Evelyn Price. However, this plate was marked as not matching for the sole reason the last digit that the delivery person remembered, as seemingly a 7 inches, did not exactly match Evelyn Price's plate, which ended with a 1. Based on the evaluation standards at that time, the police prioritized records that matched witness descriptions absolutely, and any cases with discrepancies, even small ones, were temporarily removed from the priority list for field checks. Therefore, the information about the car owned by Evelyn Price was set aside into the non-matching group and not investigated further at this time. The fact that a witness was uncertain about the last digit, combined with the neighborhood already being disturbed earlier, contributed to reducing the priority of pursuing the vehicle. As they delved deeper into the list of green Ford cars, the police continued to see the number of owners was too large, and there was no clear reason to prioritize any other case. Some owners lived dozens of miles away from the neighborhood, many had no history of traveling near this area, and most had valid registrations. Investigating each owner in this massive list was not feasible that morning, which needed to focus on searching for Lily in the nearest areas. After considering the time, resources, and requirements of the missing child protocol, the on-site team decided to only note the presence of the green Ford as a supporting reference factor, not yet sufficient to elevate it to a main investigation direction. Due to the lack of a license plate, lack of a clear driver description, lack of witnesses confirming whether the car stopped, the police temporarily held the assessment that this vehicle might just be one passing through the neighborhood without direct relation to the incident. Nevertheless, they still included the preliminary description of the car in the report for filing, and in case nearby residents continued to provide new information about the vehicle in the following hours. However, at this point, the DMV lookup did not yield specific enough data to narrow the suspicion, and the green Ford, although mentioned in multiple statements, could not be identified as a central factor. The vehicle review results led the police to realize that there was no easy investigation direction in the nearby scope, as both the neighborhood residents and the suspicious vehicle provided no leads to Lily's current location. After reviewing the suspicious vehicle, but obtaining no strong enough data to open a new investigation direction, the two police officers decided to expand the search beyond the neighborhood scope, exceeding the close radius that had already been disturbed by spontaneous search activities. The next objective was to scan the area within a radius of more than 3 miles from the Sanders porch, including the connecting roads from the block to the main road, vacant lots, small parking areas, low tree strips along the paths, and the intersections where a vehicle could turn in or leave the area without being noticed. They called in an additional patrol unit from the district to supplement manpower, ensuring the checks were conducted simultaneously in multiple directions to avoid missing traces in areas adjacent to traffic routes. When deploying the expanded search, the police identified priority checkpoints including the head of the street leading to the main road, the side road connecting the neighborhood to the small park behind the row of houses, and the narrow road running along the windbreak trees, where a vehicle could temporarily stop without residents noticing. The support unit was assigned to scan each point by driving slowly along the routes, observing the ground, curbs, trash piles, and areas that often showed traces when someone carried a child away from the neighborhood, whether carrying or leading. Another group walked to check trails and open land spaces for skid marks, small clothing, or items that might have fallen during movement. However, throughout this scanning process, no evidence or signs related to Lily were discovered. On the main road connecting the neighborhood to the primary traffic route, the police remeasured the time distance between when Lily went missing and when witnesses reported seeing the green Ford drive by. They calculated that a vehicle could leave the neighborhood in less than a minute if unobstructed, and in 3 to 5 minutes could travel more than 3 miles, beyond the range that local residents could observe with the naked eye. This led the police to seriously consider the possibility that Lily left the area by vehicle, regardless of whether it was the green Ford or not, because in the short time frame that Lily left the porch, a 2-year-old child walking more than 3 miles on her own was completely impossible. When checking the small park area behind the neighborhood, the police found no signs of a young child or adult lingering recently. The small parking lot near the park entrance also had no unusual traces. The ground had no skid marks, no scattered items, and residents living nearby confirmed they saw no young children or strangers passing through that morning. At the narrow road along the windbreak trees, where a car could stop unnoticed, the police checked the ground and grass edges, but found nothing besides a few old tire tracks from previous days. There was no evidence that a vehicle had stopped during the time Lily disappeared. During the scanning of these specific points, the police also checked 2 side roads leading to the old factory area south of the neighborhood and the abandoned land north, but no residents reported seeing a young child or stranger entering there. Those areas had almost no activity in the morning, making it even harder to detect anything related to Lily. Combining all the data from the field, scanning within the more than 3-mile radius, the police noted that there were no signs that Lily had walked, crawled, or moved out of the neighborhood on her own, and no evidence was found along possible routes if someone had taken her without care. However, the short time from when Margaret left the porch to when Lily's disappearance was realized still allowed for the possibility that she had been quickly placed in a vehicle that left the block without leaving clear traces. From the expanded search results, the police recorded in the minutes that there were no new clues within the more than 3-mile radius, and all possible routes out of the neighborhood provided no signs that Lily had been there after leaving the porch. The only thing that could be determined at this point was that the investigation direction in the close scope had not yielded results, and the possibility of Lily traveling by vehicle, although without direct evidence, became a hypothesis needing consideration due to the absence of any signs that she left the scene in any other way. When the expanded search within a range of more than 3 miles yielded no clues whatsoever, and every route leaving the residential area provided no signs that Lily had ever been there, information about the disappearance began to spread beyond the neighborhood. At first, it was just exchanges between nearby families, but within a few hours, the story reached a local reporter who specialized in community news, who happened to overhear an account from a resident while stopping by a nearby grocery store. Soon after, a short news item was published in the midday edition of the small county newspaper, describing the incident as the unusual disappearance of a 2-year-old girl in a peaceful residential area, along with a request for the public to provide information if they had seen Lily or anything unusual that morning. The appearance of the news in print quickly spread to families in the area and neighboring districts, causing the number of people coming to the Sanders home to increase, both to inquire and to share information they believed was relevant. Some claimed to have seen a small child with an adult at a market more than a mile away. Others said they heard a child crying near the park, but when questioned in detail, the times and descriptions did not match the time frame of Lily's disappearance. One person reported seeing a child in bright-colored clothing next to a strange woman near the bus stop, but could not clearly remember the child's age or hair color, making the information difficult to verify. The police received these reports in order, but most were not specific enough to be considered high-probability leads, especially since the descriptions were often too vague or occurred at times that did not align with this morning's events. Meanwhile, some residents influenced by the newspaper report spontaneously came to the area to see if they could help, increasing the chaos in front of the Sanders home and adding to the family's stress. Margaret had to answer the same questions repeatedly from strangers: what Lily was wearing, where she usually went, whether she had ever interacted with strangers. The repetition and pressure from multiple directions left her exhausted, while Thomas constantly had to explain that the family had no additional information beyond what they had already reported to the police. The media, noticing the growing interest, began sending more reporters to the neighborhood to gather images and interview residents, further increasing attention on the case. Some households expressed concern about the presence of strangers in the area, while others tried to seize the opportunity to share their own stories even if they were not directly related to the disappearance. This created significant information noise, forcing the police to spend extra time sorting through tips from people who had only heard second-hand accounts rather than witnessing events directly. In this context, the pressure on the Sanders family increased markedly. They had to deal with the fear of Lily's disappearance while facing constant attention from the community and the media. Some neighbors, out of impatience, inadvertently asked questions that made Margaret feel blamed, such as why Lily was playing alone on the porch or why she hadn't watched more closely in the moment she went inside. Though no one meant harm, Hearing such questions while in a state of emotional collapse made the family atmosphere even heavier. Thomas tried to remain calm in the face of reporters and residents, but it was clear he was unaccustomed to handling situations with crowds gathering in front of the house, and he could not control the spread of information, as every account was exaggerated or simplified depending on who retold it. By the afternoon, the number of witness tips had multiplied many times over, but most were unverified or of no practical value. The police recorded a large number of calls from residents in various areas, but the majority were just general observations like seeing a child with an adult or seeing a strange car drive by, information not detailed enough to cross-reference with existing data. Meanwhile, the Sanders family faced additional psychological pressure, as every inquiry reminded them of the deep fear that Lily might be somewhere beyond their control, and no one knew for sure what had happened. As the media continued to spread, Lily's image and details of the disappearance became known to many people. But in exchange, the amount of noise information increased, making it harder for the police to determine which leads were worth pursuing and which were just overreactions from a worried community. As information about the disappearance spread, and the volume of tips from the public increased, though most were unverified, the atmosphere at the Baltimore County Police Department headquarters began to grow more tense, especially after reports from patrol teams showed that the expanded search within a radius of more than 3 miles still yielded no signs related to Lily. The scant data collected, scattered witness statements, the bracelet dropped at the edge of the yard, and the unclear sighting of a green Ford car were not enough to create a clear investigative direction. The lack of progress, combined with pressure from the media and community, led to differing opinions within the team handling the case about how to proceed next. Some officers believed that too much time had passed compared to the norm for searching for a missing 2-year-old in a residential area, and the possibility of abduction, though unproven, could not be ruled out in these circumstances. They proposed transferring the case to the FBI, or at least requesting federal technical support, arguing that the chance Lily had been taken out of the area by vehicle, even if unidentified, was reason enough to expand the investigation beyond local jurisdiction. Those supporting this approach emphasized that the FBI had greater resources, federal coordination capabilities, and experience handling child disappearances with suspicious elements, which local forces struggled to match when actual data was lacking. However, the department's leadership, including the shift commander and senior investigators, felt this proposal was premature and not based on specific evidence. They argued that the FBI typically only takes over abduction cases with clear proof of the victim being moved across state lines or signs of serious crime such as threats, extortion, or involvement of known offenders. In Lily's case, none of the factors met that threshold. No one had directly seen her being taken away. There were no signs of break-in, no clear physical evidence indicating direction of movement, and the green Ford, though suspicious, had no confirmed link to the incident. The leadership worried that reporting to the FBI too early, without strong evidence, could complicate the process and lead to the department being criticized for not following proper local procedures. This disagreement quickly spilled into brief meetings in the investigation office, where officers debated the reasonableness of maintaining the investigation within county limits when current efforts yielded no results. Some younger officers argued that keeping the case at the local missing persons level was wasting time, especially since signs that Lily might have left the area by road or vehicle were beyond patrol control. They stressed that the longer time passed, the larger the possible travel range became, making the search far more difficult without federal support. In contrast, more veteran officers believed assuming abduction without evidence would scatter the investigation team, overlooking other possibilities that could still occur. They suggested focusing on rechecking nearby areas, reviewing witness statements, and waiting for additional community information before escalating. Throughout the debates, the investigation team's mindset was influenced by pressure from the Sanders family and the media. Some worried that failing to report to the FBI and later discovering Lily had been taken far away from the start would make them responsible for delaying the decision. Conversely, Leadership feared that handing over the case without criminal evidence would lose local control and set an unsuitable precedent for similar disappearances. The atmosphere in internal discussions grew increasingly tense, and though no direct conflicts occurred, the differing views made it hard for the team to unify on the next steps. Reports sent upward were inconsistent. Some emphasized the possibility of Lily leaving by car. Others stated all hypotheses lacked clear basis. This lack of unity delayed important decisions, as no group presented arguments strong enough to convince the entire force. Ultimately, at this point, the case remained at the local investigation level, but discord within the team had begun to show clearly. Though it did not yet lead to official changes in handling, the internal conflict slowed the investigation process and created a lack of common direction, widening the gap between the case's actual needs and the deployed procedures. In the weeks following the internal debates about whether to escalate Lily's disappearance to federal level, the investigation at Baltimore County made no further significant progress. Ongoing efforts to canvass the neighborhood, check expanded radii, cross-reference suspicious vehicle information, and receive hundreds of public tips yielded no valuable clues sufficient to redirect the case. Witness statements still revolved around the vague initial descriptions: a strange woman standing at the end of the street, a green Ford driving slowly by twice, and a boy who thought he saw someone carrying a child. This information lacked direct corroborating evidence, no additional witnesses confirmed it, and no new physical evidence emerged to link them into a verifiable chain of events. The period of no new data stretched from day to day, then week to week, forcing the investigation team to face the reality that the case was entering a stagnant phase, even as checks and searches continued on schedule. Within the police department, many officers gradually shifted from determined pursuit of leads to a cautious mindset, maintaining minimal processing to avoid missing information, but no longer expecting the initial procedures to suddenly yield results. The small press conferences held by the department to update the media became repetitive, mainly confirming no new information and calling for continued public reports of anything relevant. However, media interest began to wane without new developments, and consequently, tips from the public dropped sharply. Many tips received in this phase were mere guesses or casual observations that could not be cross-checked, quickly eliminated from processing lists. By the 6th week since Lily's disappearance, the department leadership recognized that the case was no longer in the urgent search phase, and standard missing child protocols had been fully implemented without results. They conducted an internal review of the entire file, including witness statements, search reports, resident lists, and scene notes, but found no gaps or details exploitable for further local expansion. This assessment led to adjusting the file's priority. From initial urgent status, it was moved to periodic monitoring, updated only with new community information or sufficiently strong developments from other channels. Though no one on the team wanted to admit it, the lack of clear progress over 2 months meant Lily's disappearance was no longer top priority compared to other incidents at the time. Thefts, serious accidents, and situations requiring rapid police mobilization forced resource reallocation, gradually reducing the original team assigned to Lily's case. Some members who had closely followed it felt regret for not accelerating early progress, especially since initial clues, though weak, suggested the case was not entirely straightforward. However, without specific evidence and no clear criminal signs, they could not convince superiors to maintain high priority. The Sanders family continued regular contact with the police for updates, but responses grew increasingly similar. All received information has been checked, and no new updates at this time. Thomas and Margaret clearly sensed the shift in official attitude from an initially always available team to periodic update calls and brief procedural meetings. Ultimately, when all data from the first 2 months was compiled, police concluded no investigative direction in the immediate or expanded areas showed signals to resolve the disappearance. The file was marked as no progress and maintained in waiting status, marking the end of the initial investigation phase, a phase that concluded without any breakthrough regarding Lily's location or who might have taken her from the porch that morning. In the years following the transfer of Lily Sanders' missing person file to periodic monitoring status, the processing at the Baltimore County Police Department proceeded at a slow pace and was more about maintenance than active investigation. From 1955 to 1959, the file was reopened multiple times according to internal schedules, typically every 3 to 4 months, to review the information, check whether any leads had been overlooked, or if new details had arrived via mail or notifications from neighboring counties. However, each review ended with the same conclusion: no new discoveries that could be directly linked to Lily. The old documents, including Helen's statement, the 8-year-old boy's account, the newspaper delivery person's report, the resident list, and information about the green Ford, remained in the file, but did not yield any new investigative leads, as there was no way to verify or further develop them. The police force during this period was dealing with many other cases that required higher priority, causing Lily's disappearance to gradually become one of those handled on a review when time allows basis, rather than having a dedicated team for continuous follow-up. Each time the file was reopened, the assigned investigator could only re-examine the old data and confirm that no new information had been received since the previous review. Nevertheless, some members of the public, mostly from farther areas, sent letters or called to report children they had seen whom they believed might be Lily. In most cases, the description of the child or the circumstances of the sighting did not match the timeline or characteristics of Lily at the time of her disappearance. Some reports came from people who had only casually heard about the case through the media years earlier and tried to connect what they had seen in different areas to Lily's case. But such statements became even harder to verify as time passed. A few statements were classified as late leads during 1956. 1958, when several witnesses claimed they had seen a child resembling Lily at a market or train station in the months following the disappearance. However, upon checking the timing, description, and actual location, the police found the matches too vague: no specific description of any accompanying adult, no identifying clothing details, no physical evidence, or additional statements from others present at the same location. Due to the lack of basis for verification, this information was simply noted in the reference section without opening new investigative directions. Another case was recorded in 1957, when a woman living in a town about 40 miles from Baltimore County reported seeing a light-haired little girl with a middle-aged woman at a local market. The statement was forwarded to the department for review, but when local police approached the woman for more details, she could not recall the exact timing of the incident and did not believe she could identify the child again if she saw her. With no second witness and no supporting specific details, the report was deemed too weak to be considered a viable lead. The late 1950s saw a marked decline in the number of tips related to Lily. As community attention waned, reports mostly came from people living farther away or from other parts of the state, often based on fleeting impressions without clear similarities to the disappearance. In that context, investigators gradually recorded Lily's file as one of the unsolved cases with no signs of progress to justify redeploying significant resources. The file was thus shifted to cold status, meaning it would only be reviewed if there was a specific reason to do so. Internal summary memos from this period noted that there was no indication Lily had left the area by road, no clear witness confirming an abduction, and no new physical evidence appearing after the initial bracelet was found. The only things remaining in the file were untestable hypotheses, statements that had become too vague over time, and an investigation that could not advance further due to the lack of concrete information. By the end of the 1955-1959 period, Lily Sanders' disappearance quietly slipped into a state where the investigating force could not push it further, becoming part of the county's list of unsolved cases, reopened only when new developments arose or periodic review schedules required it. Entering 1960, when Lily Sanders' missing person file had been settled in the cold case group for more than half a decade, the Baltimore County Police Department received an unexpected report from a woman living in York, Pennsylvania, about 70 miles from where Lily vanished. The woman called the switchboard directly, and stated that a few weeks earlier, at a local market, she had seen a girl around 6 or 7 years old, whose face, hair color, and build were identical to the images of Lily that had appeared in newspapers years before. She said the child was with an older woman who seemed guarded and appeared to avoid eye contact with others around her. According to her account, she only noticed because the woman was holding the child's hand quite tightly and seemed hurried while passing through the produce area. When asked why she did not report it immediately, the woman explained that she was not sure she remembered Lily's image correctly after so many years, but the familiar feeling prompted her to contact them when the situation continued to linger in her thoughts. The report was logged into the system and forwarded to the cold case unit for feasibility assessment. However, upon reviewing the information, investigators identified several issues. First, several weeks had already passed since the incident, meaning the scene or related area no longer held value for examination. Second, the description of the child was not detailed enough to establish identity, as the woman only recalled light blonde hair, a round face and eyes like in the old newspaper photo. Third, the description of the accompanying woman was even vaguer, noted only as average height, wearing a dark coat, avoiding interaction. There were no specific identifying features to cross-reference with file data. Despite this, the report was escalated to command level to consider expanding the investigation beyond state lines. During internal discussions, the previous disagreements among officers about broadening the scope resurfaced. Some argued that a witness in Pennsylvania, claiming to recognize similarities to Lily, was a rare signal after years of no noteworthy information, and even if uncertain, it was worth further checking. They contended that if a matching child had truly appeared in another state, failing to investigate could mean missing a critical opportunity. However, leadership maintained the cautious stance from prior years. They saw no element in the report strong enough to justify interstate expansion. To request FBI assistance, the case needed clear evidence that the victim had been taken across state lines or involved a confirmed crime. This report relied only on a vague impression and the memory of a single witness more than 5 years after Lily's disappearance. Additionally, the estimated age of the child in the statement, 6 to 7 years, did not fully match Lily's age at that time, as the witness's observational skills could not guarantee accuracy, especially in a brief glance. When police contacted local authorities in York for a preliminary check, Pennsylvania confirmed that the market was too crowded that day, and no one else recalled a similar situation. There was no security footage, no customer lists, and no one remembered a child matching the description. The report thus lacked grounds for expansion into field investigation. This outcome led the department to simply file the content, label it insufficient data, and take no further steps. In the evaluation process, it was viewed as one of many late tips appearing in the years after the disappearance, serving as reference, but not strong enough to change the file's status. Although a few investigators felt regret over not pursuing it further, professional procedures and evidence requirements did not allow expanding investigation based solely on one witness's intuition after many years. Ultimately, the 1960 late witness case closed like many other vague reports during the cold case period, received, documented, reviewed, but lacking grounds to turn into a new investigative direction, leaving Lily's file with no further progress. By 1962, nearly 8 years after Lily Sanders disappeared, her file remained in the Baltimore County Police Department's cold case group, subject to periodic reviews, but generating no advancements. Amid personnel changes, increasing workloads, and a storage system that still relied on manually classified paper documents, an administrative error began to form that no one in the department noticed until many years later. The error occurred when the archives section reorganized all missing persons files by age group, priority level, and investigative status. While reviewing a batch of old files, a new employee, who had only received basic procedural training, misinterpreted the code marking on Lily's file. Instead of being stored in the missing child, unresolved group, the file was mistakenly placed in juvenile runaway. This mix-up stemmed from two factors: The old code on the file cover had faded, and the statistical page noting the disappearance date had been recopied with a typing error, changing 1954 to 1959. This led the handler to mistakenly believe Lily was a teenager in 1959, not a 2-year-old girl in 1954. Once shifted to runaway, it was immediately re-evaluated under different standards. This group focused on cases of minors voluntarily leaving home, perhaps with friends or to escape family conflict, and did not require the strict monitoring applied to young child disappearances involving danger. As a result, in the updated list sent to the state level, Lily's file no longer appeared under child abduction missing minor, but in an entirely different category. From the state agency's perspective, the case no longer seemed to belong to the high-priority young child missing category. No one double-checked Lily's actual age when reports were consolidated, as the process at that time relied primarily on paperwork submitted by counties, and data discrepancies were treated as minor clerical errors without affecting overall classification. The consequence was that Lily's file was no longer on the list of young missing children cases for widespread notification when neighboring states requested periodic data cross-checks. This severely limited the ability of other agencies to detect any matches if they encountered a child with similar characteristics to Lily. Throughout 1962 and subsequent years, the file was buried deeper in the administrative system, no longer in an easily accessible position when new information arrived. The classification change meant that all reviews for young missing children groups unconsciously skipped Lily's file. New investigators joining the department from the mid-1960s onward, when researching old cases, did not see Lily's name on the under 10 missing list, leaving them unaware that an unsolved 1954 case existed within the county. This administrative error was not a deliberate decision or neglect, but a result of manual management processes lacking cross-verification, combined with frequent personnel turnover that made information handovers incomplete. In the Archives section's internal log, handwritten in blue ink, there was a brief note that Lily's file had been updated in status, but no line explained the reason or provided accompanying details. This made the discrepancy even harder to detect, as later reviewers assumed the file had been adjusted to appropriate standards. The ultimate outcome was that in 1962, one of the most serious disappearances in Baltimore County residential history inadvertently vanished from the state's child abduction watch list due solely to misclassification. There was no alert, no unusual signal, and no one realized that the error had caused Lily's file to no longer appear where it should have been reviewed most regularly. During the 1963-1970 period, the Baltimore County Police Department underwent numerous personnel changes and internal restructurings, leading some old files, including Lily Sanders' disappearance, to be pulled for review under a program to assess backlog cases for potential reactivation. A new investigative team, consisting of younger officers trained to more modern professional standards than in 1954, was assigned to review unsolved cases from the previous decade to determine which warranted priority reevaluation. When they opened Lily's file, they found it contained fragmented information, but highlighted one detail that had never been fully explored. Helen's statement about the woman in blue standing at the end of the street on the morning Lily vanished. One officer on the team questioned whether this could indicate a female perpetrator, a hypothesis rarely considered in the early investigation, when focus was mainly on male suspects or strangers passing through the neighborhood. They noted that a woman's presence near the disappearance site at such a precise time without a clear reason, combined with the report of someone carrying a child of undetermined gender, might warrant broader analysis. However, when cross-referencing the full data, the team quickly realized that the female perpetrator direction relied on only two vague pieces: the strange woman's presence and the unclear account from the 8-year-old boy. No other witness confirmed seeing this woman approach Lily or interact near the porch. Moreover, there was no specific description of identifying features such as build, face, voice, or means of transportation. Thus, although the female perpetrator hypothesis was raised as a possibility to consider, data to prove or develop it was virtually non-existent. The team continued reviewing the newspaper delivery person's statement about the green Ford, but found that vehicle-related records searched from 1954 to 1955 had not been updated, and none of the long list of green Ford owners verified had suspicious behavior during Lily's disappearance. This left the vehicle-related perpetrator hypothesis without grounds for further progress. In re-examining the resident records, the team compared 1950s notes with 1963 demographic data, but discovered no individuals with criminal histories or suspicious behavior that could connect. Those initially considered in the early phase, even if only preliminarily screened, had moved away, passed away, or had clear alibis when checked against new data. When reviewing the scene via the few remaining diagrams and photos, the team found no gaps in the initial assessment that could develop into new directions. The scene's early contamination from spontaneous searches remained the biggest obstacle, as it left every hypothesis without a physical foundation for verification. They also considered the possibility that Lily wandered off and met with an accident farther away, but the extensive 1954 searches negated this when no traces were found in the field. Despite wanting to advance the case differently, the new team realized every direction circled back to the same point. Lack of specific information, no new witnesses, no new physical evidence, no additional statements, no suspicious events tied to area residents, and no factors strong enough to expand investigation beyond county limits. The fact that Lily's file had been misclassified as runaway in 1962, which they were unaware of at the time, also contributed to state-level reports not displaying this disappearance in cross-check lists, meaning the team received no tips from other counties or states that might relate. In the final review at the end of the 1960s, the team concluded that the female perpetrator direction, though noteworthy, still lacked foundational data and had no practical way to implement. Pursuing an unnamed woman glimpsed 8 years earlier without specific description was deemed impossible, given the era's resources and technology. Thus, although the new team showed interest and effort in reopening the case, all analyses ended at the same impasse as the early phase: insufficient data to expand investigation, insufficient clues to target suspects, and insufficient information to return the case to priority status. As a result, from 1963 to 1970, Lily Sanders' disappearance continued on the unsolved list without reactivation capability, constrained by data shortages from the very beginning, and by the fading of information over time, causing every attempt to re-explore it to reach a dead end. By 1972, nearly 2 decades had passed since the day Lily disappeared, and although the case file still existed in the system as unresolved, the Sanders family received almost no notable updates from the Baltimore County Police Department. During that time, Thomas Sanders, the father, who had devoted all his energy to searching for his daughter in the early years, gradually declined in health due to prolonged psychological stress and a sense of helplessness in the face of the investigation's deadlock. He still maintained the habit of visiting the police station once a year to inquire about progress, but the responses were always the same. No new information, no new witnesses, and no additional data strong enough to reopen the case. Hearing those words repeatedly left Thomas exhausted both mentally and physically. In his final years, he clung to a faint hope that one day someone would call with news that Lily had been found. But that hope grew increasingly remote as time passed without any clues emerging. The prolonged stress caused his health to deteriorate rapidly, and in 1972, Thomas died of heart disease, which doctors attributed in part to the unresolved pain of losing his child. His death marked a major turning point for the family, not only because they lost their pillar of support, but also because he had been the one who persisted the longest in searching for Lily. After the funeral, Margaret became the only person in the family who continued to keep Lily's file and mementos, including old photographs, notes Thomas had written during the early search years, and copies of reports the police had provided them. Although she still contacted the police periodically, Margaret realized that the case had long ceased to be a priority for them. Personnel changes over generations meant that many new investigators were unfamiliar with Lily's case and could only review the old files without offering any new assessments. Her calls were often transferred to the records department, where staff would simply confirm that the case remained unsolved but had no additional data to share. The prolonged silence from the authorities made Margaret understand that if anyone was going to continue searching for Lily, it would have to be her alone. However, conducting her own investigation was beyond the capabilities of a middle-aged woman living alone with no leads to follow. Each year, as the anniversary of the disappearance approached, she would review all of her daughter's files, hoping to discover something that both the family and the police had previously overlooked. But the scattered documents revealed no new directions. Friends, old neighbors, and the local community gradually mentioned the case less, partly because so much time had passed, and partly because most residents from the 1954 era had moved away or were no longer living in the area. Margaret gradually became the last person in the old neighborhood who remembered the event in detail. Thomas's death made her feel even more alone in her journey to keep Lily's memory alive in the system. Nevertheless, she persevered in preserving every piece of information, hoping that preventing the case from being completely forgotten would mean something in the future. However, throughout 1972 and the years that followed, there was no new support from the police department. No special reviews were conducted, and no additional witnesses came forward. Lily's file remained in storage, periodically reviewed but not prioritized for reactivation. During this period, the Sanders family's loss became more evident than ever. They had not only lost Lily, but also the person who had held the strongest belief that their daughter would be found. Margaret, though she kept the complete file and a faint hope, understood that from then on, the search would depend solely on her strength. While the investigative agency no longer provided active support, and the only companion through those years of grief was no longer by her side. While she continued to live with that void, in a completely unfamiliar place, Lily's life took a different turn from the days after disappearing from the porch in Maryland. The little girl began a new life under the name Mary Ellen Price, the name Evelyn had given her, without ever knowing she had once had a different identity. When she was taken, Lily was only 2 years old, an age too young to retain any lasting memories of her biological family or the faces that had once belonged to her. As a result, during the initial transition period, Lily quickly adapted to the new environment because she lacked the ability to recognize anything unusual in her circumstances. Evelyn took the little girl to a small town far from where Lily had disappeared, rented a modest room in an old boarding house, and gradually moved to quieter residential areas, all chosen because they required little paperwork, and residents did not ask questions about newcomers' pasts. From that point onward, all of Lily's activities, now under the name Mary Ellen, were tightly controlled by Evelyn in a closed and cautious manner. Evelyn did not allow Mary Ellen to go out alone, did not let her interact with strangers, and only permitted contact with people Evelyn believed would not ask questions or suspect anything about their relationship. In the early years, Evelyn taught Mary Ellen how to introduce herself, reminding her that they were mother and daughter, that they had just moved due to unstable work, and that she must not talk to anyone about where they had lived before. Since Mary Ellen was too young to understand the meaning of those restrictions, she only knew she had to obey, because every time she asked more, Evelyn would brush it off or show tension that made the child afraid to continue. Evelyn's control was not just about monitoring movements, but encompassed all daily activities, meal times, bedtime, clothing, time leaving the house, and even the questions the child was allowed to answer. Mary Ellen grew up in an environment where control became so habitual that she did not recognize it as abnormal. Some neighbors noticed that Mary Ellen rarely played outside or participated in neighborhood children's activities, but Evelyn explained that the child was often sick or too shy, so they suspected nothing further. When Mary Ellen reached school age, Evelyn chose small schools, often private or church-affiliated ones, where detailed birth records were not strictly required, and parent-provided information was easily accepted without deep verification. Evelyn always enrolled her under the new name, filled in parent information minimally, and whenever the school requested additional documents, Evelyn cited frequent moves, lost paperwork, or other administrative issues. Since many private schools at that time did not have rigorous verification processes, Mary Ellen was admitted without obstacles. In the school environment, Mary Ellen was a quiet child who spoke little and rarely initiated friendships. She did not know how to explain why she always had to leave school immediately after classes, was not allowed to participate in extracurricular activities, and was almost never permitted to visit friends' homes. Every time she asked permission for anything involving going out with others, Evelyn immediately refused, reminding her that it was not safe, that they only needed to rely on each other, and that other people were not trustworthy. Though Mary Ellen did not fully understand the meaning of those words, she sensed Evelyn's constant anxiety and gradually came to see withdrawal as normal. In the following years, Evelyn maintained the pattern of moving frequently, especially whenever someone showed too much interest in Mary Ellen or asked questions about their background. Every few years, the two would move to a new town, making it difficult for the child to maintain long-term friendships or form any attachments beyond her sole relationship with Evelyn. This constant relocation instilled in Mary Ellen a persistent feeling that the world was always temporary and that no place truly belonged to her. Because Evelyn provided little information about the past, Mary Ellen did not know where she was born, did not know her full original name on documents, and was unaware of the existence of her biological family. During her childhood years, she had no opportunity to access any documents, photos, or stories related to herself before living with Evelyn. She only knew that her life began with the vaguest memories in the first house Evelyn took her to, where there were no items reminiscent of any earlier time. In all activities, Evelyn held absolute decision-making power, from choosing which classmates Mary Ellen could interact with, rare meetings with neighbors, to answering on her behalf about questions related to the past. As Mary Ellen became more aware of the differences between herself and other children, for instance, when friends talked about vacations with extended family or mentioned grandparents, she asked Evelyn about her maternal or paternal relatives, but only received short, evasive answers like they live very far away or were no longer in contact. These responses were repeated so often that Mary Ellen accepted them as obvious truths and stopped asking further. Throughout her childhood, no event in Mary Ellen's daily life or environment drew the attention of investigative agencies because all of Evelyn's moves were carried out cautiously to avoid notice, and no one had reason to suspect that the child was not this woman's biological daughter. Mary Ellen grew up entirely in the shadow of discreet but highly systematic control, making her life inextricably linked to Evelyn as the sole entity, with no other reference points to compare or recognize the absence of normal family relationships. During this period, Mary Ellen's entire life unfolded within that tight control, with no information, events, or interactions emerging related to the initial investigation into Lily Sanders's disappearance. Throughout the late 1950s to the end of the 1960s, Evelyn Price maintained a lifestyle of constant movement, changing residences whenever she felt the surrounding environment no longer suited her control plans. These moves were not adventurous, but always carefully calculated, choosing small towns with sparse populations, temporary boarding in suburbs, or rented homes that did not require long-term contracts. At each place they settled, Evelyn created a consistent story that she was a single mother whose unstable job forced them to move frequently. Given the economic and social context of that era, where many lived in similar circumstances, few questioned the plausibility of her explanation. For Mary Ellen, the name Lily had to use as her only identity. Constant relocation became the normal rhythm of life. The child barely had time to form deep memories of any home. Each month and year, the scenery, streets, and schools changed, creating a series of fragmented memories without connections. This continual change made Mary Ellen accustomed to playing the role of the new kid, a role Evelyn taught her to perform perfectly. Speak little, do not share family stories, avoid answering questions about the past, and absolutely never reveal any information Evelyn did not control. Mary Ellen's education was also unstable as a result. Evelyn enrolled her in various schools, but never allowed her to stay in one place long enough for teachers or the school to delve deeply into their background. Enrollment forms were always filled out by Evelyn herself, leaving blanks for fields related to the father or birth certificate. During that era, many private or church schools did not require strict records, accepting parental confirmation, so Mary Ellen was admitted easily. However, the inconsistency in records made her a floating student in the system. Each school kept a bit of data, but none had enough to form a complete file. Some schools recorded Mary Ellen as coming from Delaware, others from Pennsylvania, and some from Ohio, all based on whatever Evelyn declared depending on where they stopped. Since no one tracked this chain of changes, the pieces remained separate and did not form a picture clear enough for outsiders to suspect anything. Each school transfer was announced unexpectedly, sometimes mid-year, sometimes right after holidays. Mary Ellen had no chance to say goodbye to friends or explain the reason, as Evelyn always said things like "we can't stay here any longer," or "it's better to leave before things get complicated." Those vague statements became rules. Mary Ellen was never allowed to question. For many years, the child did not realize she lacked a complete academic record. Only when teachers requested old transcripts that Evelyn could not provide did Mary Ellen vaguely sense that her life was different from those around her. Yet Evelyn always had ready answers, blaming frequent moves for lost paperwork or delays from previous schools. Some teachers noticed irregularities but had no authority or reason to pursue further. In each new town, Evelyn chose an isolated lifestyle, minimal interaction with neighbors, avoiding community activities, and never maintaining long-term relationships. If neighbors asked too much, she cited health issues or a busy job. If teachers suggested home visits, she politely declined, sometimes even moving shortly afterward. This kept Mary Ellen in a closed world where all close relationships were blocked or limited by Evelyn. Other children often asked why she never invited friends over, why she did not join field trips or school festivals, but Mary Ellen could only smile awkwardly or say, "Mom doesn't allow it." Living like an invisible person in the community gradually made her aware that she was different from other children, but she lacked enough experience to understand why. Over many years, Evelyn tried to conceal traces by limiting external information reaching Mary Ellen. Newspapers, radio, even comic books were controlled. Any content Evelyn thought might trigger memories or questions was eliminated. Mary Ellen grew up with very little knowledge of the outside world, knowing only what Evelyn told or allowed her to access. This made it difficult for her to form independent awareness and easier to accept the secretive life Evelyn had built. The constant movement also helped Evelyn avoid recognition or tracking, though in reality, no one was investigating her during this period. Because Lily's file had been mistakenly transferred to the runaway category, no agency was questioning the search for a 2-year-old girl missing since 1954. This inadvertently allowed Evelyn to keep Mary Ellen without fear of discovery. The places they lived spanned various states, but they always chose small towns, low-population suburbs, or areas with frequently relocating communities. The mild churn in population made a child appearing with a vague background unremarkable. In each new home, Evelyn re-established the familiar control pattern. Mary Ellen was not to talk to strangers, not to go anywhere without her, and always to call Evelyn Mom in front of others. As Mary Ellen grew older and began questioning her origins more, Evelyn used guilt as a control anchor. She would say things like, "Only Mom cares about you. We have to protect each other. Or if you say the wrong thing, we'll lose everything." Since Mary Ellen had never experienced a normal family environment, she did not realize these words were meant to keep her under absolute control. Throughout this entire time, no investigative information emerged regarding Lily. No one knew Mary Ellen was the child who had vanished from a Maryland porch in 1954. Evelyn moved quickly enough, far enough, and cautiously enough to leave no clear administrative traces in any system. The scattered school records, sudden moves, and stories Evelyn fabricated all blended into the constant flow of people changing locations in America during that era. Mary Ellen, in her isolation and tight supervision, continued to grow up like a shadow, existing but leaving no clear mark in any system or community they had passed through. As Mary Ellen entered her teenage years and gradually approached adulthood, the irregularities in her personal documents, which had gone unnoticed when she was younger, began to become gaps that Evelyn could no longer fully conceal. For many years, Evelyn had been able to deflect questions from schools by citing frequent moves. But as Mary Ellen reached the age where she needed valid paperwork for more stringent purposes, such as enrolling in advanced high school programs, participating in extracurricular activities requiring medical records, or applying for part-time jobs, this deficiency became so obvious that Mary Ellen began to sense something abnormal about her own identity. Evelyn could not provide a real birth certificate because no document bearing the name Mary Ellen Price existed before 1956. Instead, she only produced a blurry copy that looked like it had been photocopied multiple times, with minimal information and no clear authentication. The people receiving the documents, sometimes school administrative staff or managers where Mary Ellen applied, often frowned upon seeing this paper, but because procedures at the time were not strictly enforced, they reluctantly accepted it or asked Evelyn to supplement the documents later. Evelyn always answered on Mary Ellen's behalf, citing excuses like old papers were lost, the local registry office burned down, or the family moved so often that records were misplaced. Mary Ellen heard these explanations throughout her teenage years, but didn't understand why her mother always reacted tensely whenever someone asked about her birth year, birthplace, or childhood medical history. The problem became even more serious when Mary Ellen had to submit medical records for a school program. When the health office staff requested vaccination history and childhood illnesses, Evelyn could not provide any information prior to 1960. The entire records that Evelyn presented consisted only of a few scattered vaccination certificates issued in different towns after Mary Ellen had been living with her for several years. There were no newborn medical records, no information about a former family doctor, no childhood care records, an obvious abnormality for anyone born within the normal healthcare system. When asked why she couldn't provide earlier records, Evelyn simply said that Mary Ellen had been raised at home and didn't go to hospitals or clinics until she was older. A reason that sounded plausible in some cases, but didn't meet the school's record requirements. With her reserved personality and the dependence formed from a young age, Mary Ellen didn't dare question Evelyn directly, but the confusion gradually built into vague suspicion, causing her to start noticing the inconsistent pieces in her life. Evelyn always avoiding conversations about relatives, then moving house right when someone asked too many questions, Evelyn not allowing her to keep any of her own documents, and especially the empty feeling whenever she tried to picture early memories that she couldn't grasp. Mary Ellen realized that she couldn't remember anything before about 3 or 4 years old, unlike many peers who could talk about their first home or childhood toys. When she asked Evelyn about that time, she only responded with irritation and told Mary Ellen don't dig up old things, which made her feel even more that something was wrong. Mary Ellen's suspicion grew when she had to write a personal biography for a school assignment that required students to record family origins, relocation history, and important childhood information. Mary Ellen realized she didn't know what to write beyond what Evelyn had told her, and upon thinking deeper, she realized that Evelyn's stories changed over time, inconsistent about dates or locations. Sometimes Evelyn said they had lived near the Delaware coast, other times that they were in Pennsylvania throughout the early years. Once she mentioned Ohio, even though Mary Ellen didn't remember ever living there. Those vague pieces of information didn't fit into any coherent picture, making Mary Ellen feel like the roots of her life were covered by a thick fog. The document irregularities became even more apparent when Mary Ellen turned 17, the age when many classmates started applying for driver's licenses. To do so, Mary Ellen needed to provide a valid birth certificate, or at least prove identity, with supporting documents. Evelyn couldn't meet this, so she immediately stopped Mary Ellen from applying, citing reasons like driving is dangerous, we don't have enough money, or it's not necessary. But Mary Ellen recognized the real reason: without a birth certificate, she couldn't get a license. She began to see the limits placed on her, not due to economic circumstances, but because of something related to herself that Evelyn was trying to hide. The suspicion turned into anxiety when Mary Ellen secretly looked through the rare documents Evelyn kept in a locked drawer in the bedroom. Almost every document showed signs of being cut and pasted, with altered names or dates, and none recorded Mary Ellen's existence before 1956. She found no original birth certificate, no newborn photos, no evidence of her birth, a gap that any adult could easily recognize as abnormal. From those scattered pieces of information, Mary Ellen began to question herself. Was she really Evelyn's daughter? Why did her entire life seem to start only after a point that Evelyn had chosen? Why was there no trace of her before that? Those questions initially appeared only when she was alone, but gradually became obsessive to the point that Mary Ellen could no longer ignore them. However, even though suspicion had formed, Mary Ellen still didn't know what to do with it. Evelyn always watched her closely, and Mary Ellen had no one else to ask or compare with. She didn't know that all those document irregularities were the consequence of a truth hidden since 1954. And that made her increasingly feel like a person standing outside her own life, seeing the emptiness where her roots and history should have been. When Mary Ellen entered her early 20s, Evelyn Price's health began to decline noticeably after many years of living under stress and constant relocation. Chest pains, persistent coughing, and increasing fatigue made Evelyn gradually lose the ability to control their lives as tightly as before. She still tried to maintain her habit of monitoring Mary Ellen, but her physical decline created many gaps in what had been a rigid schedule. At the end of that year, Evelyn was hospitalized after a sudden fainting spell. Although Mary Ellen tried to care for her every day, the doctors reported that the condition was progressing faster than expected, and Evelyn had only a short time left. In her final weeks, Evelyn was barely conscious, speaking incoherently, often confusing the present with memories that Mary Ellen didn't understand. She mentioned names Mary Ellen had never heard, strange places, and sometimes burst into tears upon seeing Mary Ellen by the bed, as if seeing someone else in her. That vagueness only added to Mary Ellen's confusion, because deep down she already harbored major doubts about her own identity that now no one could clearly explain. After Evelyn passed away, Mary Ellen returned to the small rented house where the two had been living intermittently, handling the funeral while trying to reorganize her life. For the first time in her life, she faced a space without Evelyn's control, and it was also the first time she had to handle the legal documents of the woman she had always called mother. While opening Evelyn's closet to find identification papers, Mary Ellen discovered an old wooden box carefully hidden behind neatly folded clothes. The box was locked with a small rusted lock, but it opened with just a little force. Inside, she found many of Evelyn's personal documents, old ID cards, rental agreements from years past, a few unsent letters, and scattered notes written in hurried handwriting. But what made Mary Ellen stop was a brown paper envelope tied with thin string. She opened the envelope and found a stack of black and white photos inside. In the first photo, Mary Ellen saw a little girl about 2 years old, with light-colored hair, round eyes, and a chubby face that was unfamiliar yet made her feel familiar in an indescribable way. The girl in the photo was not Mary Ellen. She realized that instantly. She had never had photos taken at that age, and Evelyn always avoided the topic when she asked about childhood pictures. But the person in the photo could be no one else but a different version of herself, or a child who resembled her strangely. As she flipped through the next photos, Mary Ellen saw the girl standing on steps, sitting next to a small wooden chair, and one taken with 2 adults, where the angle only showed part of their upper bodies. There were no date notes, no locations, no explanatory text. These photos were not family pictures in the way Evelyn had described. They seemed like hidden memories, a different life, a different beginning that Mary Ellen had never known. She also found in the box a small piece of paper with just a few words. Keep everything secret. No signature, no context. The rest of the box contained only miscellaneous items, with no documents confirming where Mary Ellen was born or who her biological parents were. The appearance of those photos caused all of Mary Ellen's long-held suspicions to converge into a feeling of shock and extreme confusion. If the person in the photos wasn't her, then why did Evelyn keep them? And if the person in the photos was her, why had Evelyn never shown them to her? And why was there no record or information linked to these images throughout her life? Evelyn's death, taking all the answers with her, only made Mary Ellen feel abandoned in a web of secrets that she didn't know where to start unraveling. Those photos became the first and only piece leading her to the possibility that her identity was not what she had been taught to believe for nearly 20 years. After Evelyn's death and the discovery of the mysterious photo box, Mary Ellen entered a long, arduous period of searching for answers to the biggest question of her life: who she was. Starting in 1995, when she was over 30 and living more stably in a small town in Pennsylvania, Mary Ellen began her journey to trace her identity by approaching government agencies responsible for storing personal records, but every door she knocked on led to a dead end. Her starting point was the local Vital Records office, where she explained that the copy of the birth certificate left by Evelyn showed signs of invalidity, and she wanted to obtain the original. The office staff, after checking the system, informed her that the birth record for Mary Ellen Price did not exist in any registry in the county. When Mary Ellen provided the scant information she knew, estimated birth year, places lived as a child, they tried cross-referencing based on name variations in areas, but still no matching record. The suggestion that Evelyn might have registered the birth in another state also led nowhere, as there was no specific information to narrow the search. Mary Ellen continued sending requests to Vital Records offices in the states where Evelyn said they had lived: Delaware, Ohio, Maryland, but all responses were the same: no birth record matching her name or similar characteristics. This situation only made Mary Ellen feel the void in her life widen, and she began to suspect that she might have been born under a completely different name. However, even when she tried querying by the surname Price, the result was still zero. During that time, Mary Ellen tried to learn more about the photos in the box, photos of a little girl who seemed to resemble her, but couldn't be confirmed. She took the photos to a few old photo shops to ask about estimated dating, and was told they could have been taken in the early 1950s. This stunned Mary Ellen, because if the photos were taken before 1956, the first time she had medical records, it meant she had existed under a different name before becoming Mary Ellen Price. In subsequent efforts, Mary Ellen went to the Social Security Administration office to request information based on the Social Security number Evelyn had registered for her when she was old enough to work. However, the system only had data starting from the late 1960s, nothing before, and the agency couldn't trace original information without knowing the birthplace. She was informed that most old records couldn't be accessed without clear basis. The absence of data everywhere she went made Mary Ellen start to feel like a person with no starting point in the administrative system, an entity without records, without origins, without confirmed history. From 1998 to the early 2000s, Mary Ellen persistently sent letters to various agencies, state vital records offices, medical record archives, even the archives of major hospitals. She tried expanding the search by including childhood photos in hopes someone would recognize the background or photography style, but most replied that they couldn't verify information based solely on images. She also tried contacting some old churches that kept baptism and ceremony records for local children in the 1950s, but there were no entries related to her name or the images in the records. Meanwhile, the suspicion about her identity became increasingly heavy. Mary Ellen began to realize that every story Evelyn had told about her childhood was unverifiable, and the more she looked back, the more they seemed like layers created to hide the truth. On long nights staring at the old photos, Mary Ellen clearly felt that the person in them was herself as a very young child. But that past belonged to a world she didn't know how to enter. This urged her to find the truth, no matter how much it might hurt her. By the mid-2000s, when DNA testing became more common in personal services and accessible to the public through civil testing centers, Mary Ellen began to wonder if this could be the only way out of the deadlock of paper records. For the first time in her life, she could rely on a method that didn't require any birth certificate, hospital records, or information from Evelyn. However, deciding to do a DNA test was not simple for Mary Ellen. She feared the results might confirm her suspicion that Evelyn was not her biological mother, meaning her entire life was built on a false story. But at the same time, she knew that if she didn't take this step, she would never understand her origins and would forever live in an unsolved void. From 2004 to 2006, Mary Ellen spent many months considering, researching the testing process and the DNA databases capable of matching with missing persons records and unidentified cases. She also visited small online forums, starting to become popular at that time, to read stories of people who had rediscovered their identities through DNA. Those experiences made her realize she was not alone. There were others who had grown up with missing records, vague identities, and severed memories. Finally, in 2006, after more than a decade of trying to find information through every traditional means without results, Mary Ellen made the firm decision to undergo DNA testing as the first and only step she could take to determine the truth about her identity herself. In her mind at that time, there was only one goal: if the paper system couldn't answer, then her own body would answer in its place. When Mary Ellen completed the DNA test in mid-2006, she only hoped to find a small clue to determine where she was born or any family connection, but she didn't expect the results to unfold a chain of events far beyond what she had imagined. After receiving the sample, the lab informed her that she could choose to share her DNA data with national missing persons search systems, including NamUs, a database newly expanded at that time to match DNA information, descriptions, and investigative data from tens of thousands of unidentified or long-missing cases. Initially, Mary Ellen hesitated because she didn't think she qualified as a missing person, but she also knew that all previous paper-based searches had been fruitless. Ultimately, recalling the feeling when looking at the black and white photos in the wooden box, especially the eyes of the child who resembled her so eerily, Mary Ellen decided to sign the consent form for the lab to submit her DNA sample to NamUs as self-identification of unclear identity. The DNA sample was coded, entered into the system, and immediately placed into the automatic matching process, where algorithms would compare her data with thousands of unmatched records nationwide. Mary Ellen had no idea that in an old state-level file deep in the system, misfiled for nearly half a century, there still existed a late updated DNA record from a genetic archiving program for historical missing persons cases. That record was labeled Lily Sanders, Missing Child Maryland 1954, and remained in an internal NamUs branch list even though much of the case information had never been fully matched due to an administrative error from 1962. A few weeks after Mary Ellen's DNA was entered, a technician in the NamUs matching unit received a notification of a high probability match between the self-submitted sample and data from a 1954 missing person. This was a rare alert level, as the system usually only flagged when a sample matched over 95% with genetic data from relatives, in this case, a DNA sample stored from Lily's biological mother, decades earlier in a little-known cold case analysis support program. The technician reviewed the information. The missing person record clearly stated the victim was a 2-year-old girl named Lily Sanders, disappeared from a residential area in Maryland in 1954. The comparison sample was from a woman named Mary Ellen Price, approximately mid-30s. At first glance, the two names and timelines had no connection. especially since Mary Ellen was not on any state's missing persons list. However, the genetic markers showed an abnormally high mother-child match probability, too high to be random. Per procedure, the technician escalated the notification to the senior analysis team to evaluate error potential, check for surname or geographic coincidences, but upon review, the team confirmed that Mary Ellen and the Lily Sanders 1954 record had a direct blood relation, an undeniable conclusion from the data. The name Mary Ellen Price did not appear in any missing persons lists, but the DNA matched perfectly with the stored sample from the mother of a child missing nearly 5 decades earlier. All biological indicators pointed to one truth: Mary Ellen was Lily Sanders, the child who disappeared in 1954 at age 2. The match was marked as critical hit priority, allowing notification to local investigative agencies. Immediately after, NAMUS sent an official report to the Maryland State Police, informing them they had an adult match fully aligning with one of their long-term missing persons cases. Upon receiving the report, most investigators serving at the time had never heard of the Lily Sanders case because the 1962 misfiling had removed it from the state's abducted children list. They had to dig into archives, search misclassified groups, and finally restore the entire Lily file to reinvestigation status. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen had no idea her data had triggered a system-wide shock in NAMUS. When she agreed to submit the DNA, she only hoped for minor information to identify her true birthplace. She didn't expect to awaken a record forgotten for over 50 years, and that her identity would be matched to a child who disappeared from a time when she herself hadn't yet been born, under the name Evelyn gave her. She didn't yet know that sample had opened the first door to the truth she had sought her whole life. The truth that her past lay in an unsolved missing persons case, and that her real identity was not Mary Ellen Price, but the name buried for nearly half a century, Lily Sanders. In early 2007, immediately after NAMUS sent an official notification about the DNA match between Mary Ellen Price and the file Lily Sanders, Missing Child 1954, the Maryland Police Department promptly requested the Archives Department to retrieve all related records for handover to the Specialized Cold Case Investigation Team. The matter drew significant internal attention, not because they were certain this was a breakthrough, but because of the persistent existence of this file, misclassified for decades yet never removed from the system, which left many people perplexed. When the documents were brought out, the new investigators saw for the first time an old, time-faded folder with the cover clearly marked, Lily Sanders, 2 years old. Missing March 14, 1954, Baltimore County. Next to it was a scribbled note in blue ink, reclassified, 1962. Right from the moment they opened the file, the cold case team understood they were facing a case that was both extremely old and affected by prolonged administrative errors, yet it carried a DNA signal too strong to ignore. They began by inventorying all remaining physical evidence, a small plastic bracelet found at the edge of the Sanders yard in 1954, several crime scene photos taken with an old film camera, a map analyzing the 3-mile search radius around the neighborhood, witness statements and reports about a green Ford car. These items, though preserved in sealed boxes, could not be used for DNA extraction because 1954 technology did not require biological sampling, and the storage methods of that era did not meet modern standards. However, the team still documented everything, as any small detail could help reconstruct the context. Next, they reviewed all witness statements, Helen's account of the woman in blue standing at the end of the street, the boy's statement that he saw someone carrying a child, the newspaper delivery person's statement about a green Ford driving slowly through the neighborhood twice, along with compiled notes on the chaos at the scene due to spontaneous searches. When cross-referencing, the investigators realized that the case had never lacked leads from the start. It had simply not been pursued in the right direction, and was distorted by the circumstances of the time. They flagged points for re-examination: the appearance of the strange woman, the list of green Ford owners in Maryland in 1954, the location where the bracelet was found, and most importantly, the reason the file was misclassified as runaway in 1962. Upon deeper checks into the state system, the cold case team discovered that during a data consolidation in the 1980s, the Lily Sanders file remained in storage but was never returned to priority lists because it did not match any review requests. The 1962 classification error thus led to a chain of over 40 years where the file was hidden from investigators' view. Recognizing the severity of this mistake, they drafted a report confirming that the case needed to be reopened from scratch as a missing person investigation that had never been fully pursued. The next step for the team was analyzing the DNA data. In the NAMOS report sent over, the genetic comparison clearly stated that Mary Ellen Price's sample matched at a maternal match level with the DNA sample stored from Lily's mother. This sample had been submitted to the Genetic Archive when Maryland implemented cold case analysis in the late 1980s. After collecting records from families with children missing before DNA was widely applied, the forensic biology investigator confirmed that such a match could not be random and was sufficient to conclude a direct blood relationship between Mary Ellen and Margaret Sanders, Lily's biological mother. This meant that the woman named Mary Ellen Price, living in Pennsylvania, was Lily, the child who disappeared on that March morning in 1954. After solidifying the DNA conclusion, the team returned to all the old data to analyze whether any factors from 1954 could link to the identity of Evelyn Price, the woman who had raised Mary Ellen for decades. Initially, there was no information about Evelyn in the original file, as her name had never come up on the morning Lily disappeared, and no resident described the woman in blue clearly enough. However, one investigator noticed a coincidence between the vague description woman in a blue coat with shoulder-length hair and an old photo from personal documents that Mary Ellen had submitted with her DNA file. It was Evelyn's ID photo from the 1960s, though the face angle was unclear. The build and hairstyle matched the witness description. This was not yet evidence, but became a point for further verification. To reconstruct the incident, the team reused the original 1954 map, circling every possible direction an adult could leave the neighborhood within 3 minutes after picking up Lily. They used traffic data from that era to determine the shortest routes out of the area. All pointed to, if someone immediately put Lily in a car, they could exit the nearby search radius before police arrived. This matched Lily's disappearance without a trace. Next, they re-examined the list of green Ford vehicles registered in Maryland in 1954. The old list had hundreds of entries, but the investigators noted one license plate that had been on the no-match list at the time, a car registered to Evelyn Price, eliminated only because the witness recalled something like a 7 at the end. This minor discrepancy meant Evelyn's car was not pursued further in 1954. Now, with new DNA data, the team immediately returned this plate to the list for review. All evidence from the box of photos Evelyn left behind, including images of young Lily, was also added to the file, though not used as legal evidence, but as supporting documentation for the new information flow. In cross-referencing old data with 2006-2007 data, the investigators noted 3 key points. 1. The undeniable DNA match. 2. The appearance of the strange woman in 1954, matching descriptions of Evelyn. 3. The license plate wrongly eliminated during the initial investigation. These 3 points became the foundation for the team to proceed to the next step, fully restructuring the case under modern standards, reviewing all records, evidence, statements, scene maps, and genetic information with the goal of determining the sequence of events from 1954 to 2007. And at the moment the file was fully reopened, the cold case team understood that they were no longer handling a hopeless missing person case from the past. They were facing the possibility of resolving one of Maryland's longest cold cases. When the cold case team reopened Lily Sanders' file in 2007, their next task was to trace the movement history and true identity of Evelyn Price, the woman whom DNA data and pieces from the old file indicated was likely the one who took Lily from the porch in 1954. Since Evelyn had passed away, the investigation had to rely entirely on archived documents, public records, tax files, rental data, and indirect sources that could reconstruct her journey over more than 5 decades. The investigators started by accessing federal tax records, which retained minimal information about workplaces, income, and declared addresses year by year. Evelyn's records were irregular, with many prolonged gaps, but still provided important milestones. In the first half of the 1950s, Evelyn appeared in tax data with an address in Baltimore County, near the area where Lily disappeared in the same year as the incident. This was immediately flagged as a critical time-location match, as no prior documents confirmed Evelyn had ever lived near the Sanders home. Continuing through later years, the investigators discovered Evelyn left Baltimore just a few months after the disappearance, moving to rent a room in a small town in Pennsylvania, matching Mary Ellen's description of where she lived as a young child. When cross-referencing movement data, they identified a consistent pattern. Every few years, Evelyn changed addresses, moving through multiple states, from Pennsylvania to Ohio, then to New York, and back to Pennsylvania. The investigators noted that new address declarations always appeared after prolonged periods without tax records, meaning she may have used different names or worked in formal jobs before temporarily stabilizing her identity. This aligned with how Evelyn controlled Mary Ellen's life. The girl changed schools frequently, left no consistent records, and often vanished from systems whenever Evelyn relocated. In parallel with tax data, the team checked rental records from old property management companies. Though most documents from the 50s, 60s were lost or no longer stored, they found 3 rental contracts under Evelyn Price's name from 1954, 1956, and 1959. The 1954 contract listed an address about 1.2 miles from the Sanders home, close enough for Evelyn to know the area well, or even walk through it. A note in the contract showed Evelyn moved in early 1954, just weeks before Lily vanished. This prompted the investigators to pause and recheck residency databases. No one in the Sanders neighborhood ever mentioned a new resident nearby, because Evelyn lived in a row of rentals just outside the immediate area. Thus, she could appear suddenly without drawing neighbors' attention at the Sanders home. The 1956 rental contract showed Evelyn moved to Pennsylvania at a time closely matching when Mary Ellen was still young enough not to remember the move. The 1959 contract, though less detailed, confirmed Evelyn lived in Ohio around the time Mary Ellen said she attended a small church school but couldn't recall the name. All created a surprisingly matching chain of movements with the timelines Mary Ellen described, even though she had no prior knowledge of her past. Continuing with financial records, the team found Evelyn never held a fixed job for more than 3 years. She worked as a sales assistant, temporary nurse's aide, laundry worker, and even had a period as a night shift checker at a factory. But each position was short-lived. This constant change fit the pattern of movement to avoid deep social ties or easy tracing. When compared to Mary Ellen's fragmented school records, the consistency was even clearer. Every address change by Evelyn matched when Mary Ellen had to switch schools. In the next step, the investigators re-examined the 1954 witness description of the strange woman: blue coat, shoulder-length hair, average build. When compared to Evelyn's identification photos from the 1960s, found in items Mary Ellen submitted, they noted a clear similarity in physique and style. Though photos taken years later could not confirm absolutely, the investigators flagged it as a noteworthy coincidence, given the lack of depth in other descriptions in the case. The analysis team continued checking 1954 traffic data, especially the list of green Ford cars registered in the county. When refiltered by modern standards, they confirmed Evelyn's Ford, registered in the year of the disappearance, was actually in the highest suspicion group. This drew special attention, as in the original 1954 investigation file, Evelyn's car had been on the list but eliminated, due only to uncertainty in the witness's recall of the plate's last digit. Now, with new context, that elimination was seen as a serious error that stalled the case from the early stage. As the investigators connected all the data, where Evelyn lived, worked, moved after 1954, Mary Ellen's school records, rental contracts, and the license plate, they began to see an orderly sequence of events. 1. Evelyn lived near the area of Lily's disappearance, just before the incident. 2. She left the area only months later. 3. For many years afterward, she raised a child whose appearance matched Lily. 4. She lived isolated from communities, avoiding continuous records. 5. She moved whenever there was a risk of questions. 6. Mary Ellen's identity did not exist before 1956. 7. Mary Ellen's DNA matched Lily's biological mother. Though Evelyn could not be interviewed, these facts created a solid basis for the team to conclude she was the one who took Lily from the porch in Baltimore County in 1954. Tracing Evelyn's movement history through tax, rental, and public documents opened the first comprehensive picture in over 50 years. A woman who appeared before the disappearance, left the area right after, moved in an evasive pattern, and raised a child without papers, matching the original missing person data. From a professional perspective, this coincidence was no longer random. It became the foundation for re-identifying the perpetrator with high reliability in the context of a half-century cold case. When the cold case team completed tracing Evelyn Price's movement history, collecting all data from tax records, rental contracts, personal documents, and cross-referencing with 1954 witness statements and 2006 DNA results, they began the most important step, reconstructing the entire abduction of Lily Sanders from the moment the child stood on the porch steps on that March morning in 1954, until her true identity was confirmed in 2007. To do this, they created a detailed timeline, divided into distinct phases, and identifying each verifiable timestamp with evidence or indirect data. The timeline started in early 1954, when Evelyn's tax records showed she moved to a rental only about a mile from the Sanders home. This was the first milestone proving Evelyn's presence in the area before the disappearance. The team marked this as target environment approach, as it showed Evelyn had enough time to observe the neighborhood, understand residents' routines, and know that Lily often played on the porch each morning. Next was the disappearance date. The morning Margaret stepped inside for a few minutes, Helen was distracted upon seeing the strange woman at the end of the street. The 8-year-old boy stated he saw someone carrying a child, and the newspaper delivery person saw a green Ford drive slowly by twice. Cross-referencing with 1954 vehicle registration records showed Evelyn owned a matching green Ford, and in the initial investigation file, her plate had been on the suspect list but eliminated due to a minor witness discrepancy. This was seen as the link leading to the failure of the early investigation. In the reconstructed timeline, the team determined the abduction likely occurred in just 2 to 4 minutes when Margaret went inside and Helen was distracted looking down the street. According to their analysis, Evelyn may have been watching from afar, waiting for the exact moment the porch was unsupervised. The bracelet's location near the road edge, with no footprints from Lily leading there, supported the argument that the child was lifted off the ground rather than walking away. From the bracelet drop point to where the green Ford was seen driving by was only a short distance, enough for someone carrying a child to reach the car in seconds. The timeline then noted the leaving Baltimore County milestone. Tax records showed Evelyn changed addresses in summer 1954, just months after the disappearance. This was a clear sign of fleeing the area immediately after committing the crime, a common pattern in personal abductions without financial motives, but driven by psychological or personal needs. The next milestone in the timeline was 1956, when a rental contract appeared in the Pennsylvania town where Mary Ellen Lilly's new name said she had her earliest vague memories. Fragmented school records showed Mary Ellen registered at a church school in 1956 under a completely new name, with no supporting documents. This matched Lily being about 4 years old, the age to start preschool, and fit the pattern of perpetrators creating false identities for victims to legitimize the child's existence. The 1956-1970 phase recorded Evelyn's continuous movements, matching tax records, rental data, and Mary Ellen's accounts of frequent school changes, no fixed friends, and constant isolation. The team identified this as a relocation to avoid tracing chain, typical in long-term child abductions, where perpetrators keep victims for years and move whenever identification risks arise. In this phase, the timeline also noted a key milestone, the 1962 administrative error that reclassified Lily's file as runaway, removing it from state abduction lists. This completely halted pursuit for decades. The team concluded that without this error, the case might have been reviewed earlier, especially as federal missing persons systems began forming in the 1980s. The timeline continued with post-1970 milestones, as Evelyn and Mary Ellen lived in various states per tax and employment data. The match between Evelyn's declared locations and Mary Ellen's fragmented memories helped the team reconstruct Lily's childhood almost perfectly. By 1995, 2006, the timeline noted Mary Ellen's independent search for identity, submitting requests to agencies, and receiving only no data responses. This milestone was not directly tied to the abduction, but was crucial in validating that Mary Ellen's identity had no legitimate administrative origin, reinforcing that her true identity was replaced from the start. The biggest milestone came in 2006, when Mary Ellen submitted her DNA to NamUs, leading to the match with the Lily Sanders, 1954 file. This was the DNA match point, the factor that shattered over 50 years of investigative errors. Upon completing the timeline, the team had enough data to analyze the perpetrator's motive and modus operandi. Regarding motive, they determined it was not a ransom kidnapping, not organized crime, and had no exchange elements. Data showed Evelyn acted alone, without notification, without demands, and raised the child for years as her own. This fit the abduction for child appropriation type, often stemming from psychological disorders, child loss, social isolation, or personal obsession with motherhood. Since Evelyn's personal records lacked medical or psychiatric information, the team could not pinpoint the exact cause. But the behavior pattern, isolation of the victim, identity change, constant movement, matched typical female lone perpetrators. Regarding method, the team confirmed the perpetrator observed the target beforehand, exploited a moment of family inattention, approached quickly, carried the child away, and got into the car before any witness could clearly identify. This explained why the scene had no Lily footprints and the bracelet dropped in a location inconsistent with walking away. After fully assembling the 1954-2007 timeline, analyzing motive and method, cross-referencing DNA, residency, and witness data, the team concluded that the incident was not a wandering off or accident disappearance, not taken by an acquaintance, but a child abduction carried out by a single individual, Evelyn Price. The case, after more than half a century, was clearly identified as an intentional personal abduction, with the deceased perpetrator and the victim finally having her true identity confirmed through modern DNA data. After the in-depth investigation team completed the full reconstruction of the kidnapping events and determined that Mary Ellen Price was highly likely to be Lily Sanders based on DNA matching and a residency data chain spanning over half a century, the critical next step was to conduct the official identity verification process according to modern standards. This required directly comparing Mary Ellen's DNA sample with the remaining DNA sample from Lily's biological mother, Margaret Sanders, which had been collected in the late 1980s as part of a genetic archiving program to assist in missing persons investigations. Margaret's DNA sample was still in the system, preserved as part of efforts to maintain opportunities for resolving cold cases, even though no one at the time knew that Lily's file had been misclassified for many years. When the forensics department compared the two DNA samples, the results were clear and error-free. The mother-child match rate was nearly absolute, far exceeding the threshold required to confirm direct blood relation. The official report submitted to the investigation team stated clearly that Mary Ellen Price could be no one other than the biological child of Margaret Sanders, thereby reinforcing the entire conclusion built by the team during the case reconstruction. With this genetic data, all remaining doubts about random coincidence, technical errors, or sample handling mistakes were eliminated. The certainty of the results meant that the case, for the first time in over 5 decades, had an indisputable legal resolution. Upon receiving the DNA report, the investigation team immediately proceeded to the next step, cross-referencing Mary Ellen's personal information with all data in Lily's file to check for matches beyond biological factors. They noted that Mary Ellen's age matched the year Lily would have turned 55 in 2007. Childhood photos kept by Evelyn matched the description of Lily in the 1954 file and showed clear facial similarities. Mary Ellen's vague memories from very early childhood were consistent with early memory loss in children separated from their family at age 2. Rental contracts and tax data aligned with the movement timeline reconstructed by the team. At the same time, they thoroughly examined all administrative records ever issued under the name Mary Ellen Price, confirming that this identity only appeared after Evelyn took Lily away from Maryland. There were no valid documents proving the existence of Mary Ellen before 1956. This reinforced the conclusion that her identity was a fabricated one created by Evelyn, not based on any legal foundation. Subsequently, the investigation team proceeded to finalize the official file. In the re-evaluation report, they clearly stated, "The identity of Mary Ellen Price has been verified as fully matching the missing person from 1954, Lily Sanders, through DNA analysis and multi-source data cross-referencing. The missing person file has been updated from unresolved to identified, victim found alive." This status change was not only of legal significance, but also historical, as Lily's file was one of the longest-standing missing persons cases in Maryland's database that still retained original physical evidence. To complete the confirmation process, the team also cross-checked with federal databases to ensure no other individual was using the name Mary Ellen Price that matched the verified person. After reviewing all Social Security records, federal tax files and residency registrations, they confirmed that there was only one person with Mary Ellen's Social Security number, and all related data traced back to her life under Evelyn's care. From 1956 onward, fully consistent with the conclusion that Mary Ellen was Lily. The investigation team drafted an updated file, adding appendices including the full DNA report, a reconstructed 1954-2007 timeline, analysis of Evelyn's motive and kidnapping method, comparison photos of Lily and Mary Ellen, genetic comparison with Margaret's sample, Evelyn's residency timeline list, and a comprehensive summary of all remaining evidence from the original case. All these documents were sealed into a new file, replacing the old one that had been misclassified for nearly half a century. Finally, the investigation team submitted the comprehensive report to the State Missing Persons Division to update the case status, while also sending identity confirmation documents to relevant agencies to prevent confusion in national systems. Verifying Lily's identity through DNA not only closed a 53-year-old cold case, but also corrected an administrative error dating back to 1962, restoring the file to its true legal nature, that Lily was not a runaway child, not a disappearance without cause, but a victim of a personal kidnapping. The completion of this file became a pivotal turning point, ending the long period of the case being misunderstood and paving the way for subsequent steps regarding personal identity, legal matters, and family. After Mary Ellen Price's identity was officially confirmed as Lily Sanders, the investigation team moved on to the next important personal task, determining the status of the biological mother, Margaret Sanders, to notify her of the results and prepare for reunion steps. Initial records indicated that Margaret was still alive in the late 1980s when she provided a DNA sample for the genetic archiving program, but from then until 2007, there were no updates because the case file had been misclassified and not regularly followed. The team began by checking Social Security records to see if Margaret was still receiving benefits or had any recent administrative activity. The records showed she still had an active account with a residency address at a small housing complex in western Maryland, about 90 miles from where she had lived decades earlier. This was the first sign that Margaret was still alive and her current address was valid. However, given her age of nearly 80, the team needed to confirm her actual status through other sources. They contacted local health authorities to check long-term care records and learned that Margaret had a history of regular medical checkups, indicating she was not in a nursing home, but maintaining independent living with minimal community support. An investigator was sent to the residency area for direct verification. The complex manager confirmed that Margaret lived very quietly, with little interaction with neighbors, but still shopping and caring for herself. She was described as gentle, quiet, and carrying the demeanor of someone always waiting for something. When the investigator asked about family history, the manager knew nothing about Lily, as Margaret had not mentioned her daughter in recent years. The team noted this as consistent with the psychological profile of families with long-term missing children. Most parents in cold cases often stop sharing about the child due to suppressed emotions or believing no one could help them search anymore. After confirming Margaret was alive, the team's next step was to plan a careful notification of Lily's identity, as this information could be profoundly shocking for someone who had lived over half a century with the pain of losing a child. Before approaching Margaret, they worked with a psychologist from the Victim Support Division, experienced in handling late reunions after years of disappearance. The experts recommended that the information be delivered directly, with immediate medical support available in case of extreme reactions. They also emphasized that the team should not make assumptions about Margaret's desires or ability to receive the news, as each parent reacts differently when told their child is alive after more than 50 years. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen, who had not yet been informed of the DNA match, was continuing to live with doubts and questions about her past without answers. The team decided to keep the results confidential, initially to ensure the notification process followed proper legal sequence. First confirm the biological mother, then the adult child. Regarding Margaret, after the investigation team had prepared all comparison documents, they planned the approach by scheduling a meeting at her home rather than summoning her to the police station, given her age and health not suitable for travel. The lead cold case investigator and an assigned psychologist headed the group visiting Margaret. In the initial approach, they did not mention the DNA results immediately, but only asked about her daughter, the day Lily disappeared, and the years she spent searching. Despite the long passage of time, Margaret still retained clear memories of that morning in 1954, Lily playing on the porch steps, her turning inside for just a few minutes, and running out to find her daughter gone. When asked if she still held hope that Lily was alive, Margaret replied that she had not dared to dream of it for a very long time, but every year on 00, the anniversary of the disappearance, she still placed a small chair by the window in case she comes back. That moment confirmed to the team that Margaret had sufficient awareness and emotional capacity to receive the major news, but they still proceeded cautiously. Over the following week, they reorganized the documents for easy presentation: DNA results, comparison photos, Evelyn's movement timeline data, objective match points, and the forensics lab confirmation report. Their goal was not only to prove Lily was alive, but also to explain through modern investigative methods why the case was only now resolved. When all preparations were complete, the investigation team was ready to enter the most critical phase, informing Margaret that her daughter, Lily Sanders, who disappeared from the porch in 1954, at age 2, had been determined to be alive under the name Mary Ellen Price. This was the beginning of a reunion no one thought possible after more than half a century. When the investigation team had fully prepared the documents and coordinated with the psychologist to ensure the notification process was safe, they returned to Margaret's home on a quiet spring morning in 2007, bringing the identity confirmation report and comparison photos of Lily and Mary Ellen. Margaret opened the door with a mix of surprise and caution, as she was not used to visitors, especially those with a formal appearance, like the group standing on her porch. After a few light greetings, they sat down at the small table by the window, where Margaret had often placed the empty chair for Lily over the decades. The lead investigator began the conversation by recalling that they had reviewed her daughter's file, based on national system information, emphasizing that their visit today was not to ask more questions, but to bring important news directly related to Lily. Margaret listened calmly, but her eyes widened, as if intuition told her something monumental was approaching. When the investigator said that new DNA results had led to a conclusion unprecedented in over half a century, she placed both hands on the table, trembling so much that the teacup in front of her shook slightly. The psychologist gently moved closer, saying nothing, just providing supportive presence. Then the investigator opened the file folder, placing a current photo of Mary Ellen next to one of the 1954 photos of Lily that Margaret had provided to authorities. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Margaret raised her hand to her mouth, choking up as she looked into the eyes in the new photo, a pair of eyes she recognized immediately, despite the years that had passed. Without anyone needing to finish the sentence, she understood before hearing the explanation. Lily was alive, and the woman in the photo was her daughter. When the investigator confirmed that they had verified the identity through direct DNA testing between Mary Ellen and the sample Margaret provided in the 1980s, Margaret broke into sobs, slumping back in her chair, as if her body could not bear the weight of joy and shock at once. She whispered, almost inaudibly, "She's still alive, all this time." The tears she thought she no longer had the strength to shed now flowed like a dam breaking from pain buried too long. The investigator gave her time to compose herself before continuing to explain that Lily was now a grown woman living in Pennsylvania and had no knowledge of her true identity until she submitted DNA herself due to suspicions about her origins. Upon hearing that Lily, now named Mary Ellen, knew nothing of what happened, Margaret nodded faintly, as if empathizing with the confusion her daughter had carried throughout her life. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, and when asked if Margaret wanted to meet Lily, she cried again, placing her hand on her chest, as if to hold her heart from bursting with emotion. "I've waited for this day my whole life," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Even if I only have one day left to live, I want to see her." From there, the investigation team began coordinating preparations for the reunion, an event of not only personal significance, but also the end of a tragedy spanning more than half a century. They contacted Mary Ellen and arranged a meeting at the Victim Support Office in Pennsylvania. Mary Ellen arrived with a mix of anxiety and hope, unaware of what awaited her. When informed that they had determined her true identity and that her biological mother was still alive, Mary Ellen was speechless for several minutes, as if the world had just changed color before her eyes. She stared at the photo of Lily they showed her, then at the current photo of Margaret, and silent tears fell, not from pain, but from the feeling of finding something she had never known she lost. After years living amid doubt and emptiness, Mary Ellen finally touched the missing piece she had always sensed, but could not name. She whispered, almost to herself, "So, I really do have a family." When asked if she wanted to meet Margaret, Mary Ellen simply nodded, unable to hide the tremble in her voice. "I have to meet her. I need to meet her." The reunion was held in a small room at the Victim Support Center, with medical staff and psychologists on standby in case of overwhelming emotional reactions. Mary Ellen arrived first, sitting on a chair in the corner, her hands clasped tightly, as if trying to hold herself together. When the door opened and Margaret entered, her face lit with anticipation, fear, and love intertwined. The moment the two saw each other, no one in the room dared move. Mary Ellen stood up abruptly, but her legs froze midway, as if unable to believe she was seeing what her heart had secretly longed for all these years. Margaret, with trembling hands, stepped slowly forward, and when only a few steps remained between them, Mary Ellen burst into tears and rushed toward her, as if the instinct of the 2-year-old child had finally found its home. The mother and daughter embraced tightly, unable to speak for many minutes, only sobs mingling together, the cries of rebirth, of old pain opened and closed in the same breath. The room fell completely silent. No one dared interrupt that sacred moment. Margaret stroked Mary Ellen's hair, whispering the name Lily, as if calling back the soul of the child she thought was lost forever. Mary Ellen did not know who she should be in that instant, Lily or Mary Ellen, but she knew the arms holding her were the answer she had sought her whole life. After both calmed down somewhat, they sat, and Margaret held her daughter's hand tightly, as if afraid that letting go would make everything vanish like a dream. There were no probing questions, no expectations of explanations, just the presence of two people reconnected after half a century apart. The staff only documented the event, without interfering in their emotions. The reunion lasted hours, with small stories, long silences, and looks that needed no explanation. And right there in that room, for the first time in 53 years, the Sanders family was reborn, not through investigation or justice, but through the truth returned to two people who had spent their lives searching for each other. After the deeply emotional reunion, when both Lily and Margaret had experienced the moment of compensating for half a century of separation, the investigation team continued to compile the remaining tasks. Post-reunion procedures, questions that could not be answered, and investigative directions that could not be fully pursued due to the passage of too much time. Although the case had identified the perpetrator, the victim's identity, and the entire kidnapping process, many issues related to Evelyn's context and behavior remained beyond the ability to decipher. One of the first questions the investigation team had to address was the possibility that Evelyn had accomplices. Based on the available data, there was no direct evidence indicating that she received assistance from anyone during the process of taking Lily out of the residential area in 1954, or in the many years of subsequent movement. The behaviors documented, living in isolation, traveling alone, having no relatives, not building a social network, and controlling Lily in an isolation pattern, all aligned with a lone perpetrator. However, because more than half a century had passed since the incident, the investigation team could not completely rule out the possibility that Evelyn had received informal help from short-term acquaintances, landlords, or people unaware of the nature of her actions. No records remained detailed enough to trace those individuals, and most witnesses from that era were no longer alive. Thus, the question, did Evelyn have accomplices, became one of the pieces that history no longer had sufficient basis to complete. The second question concerned whether Evelyn might have been involved in other missing persons cases during the time she continuously moved through multiple states. This was a direction once raised by the investigation team during the reassessment phase. As the perpetrator's behavior pattern, living in isolation, always carrying a child without records, moving whenever questioned deeply, shared characteristics with some unsolved missing persons cases in various localities. However, when checking the list of missing persons corresponding to Evelyn's timeline, they found no cases with information or circumstances suggesting a connection to her. Missing persons cases from that era often lacked complete records, but there was also no evidence that Evelyn had appeared at any other crime scene besides Lily's. Criminologists consulted also assessed that Evelyn's behavior fit the profile of a perpetrator attached to only one victim, often stemming from personal psychological needs, not the type who reoffends multiple times. Nevertheless, the investigation team still noted this question as one that could not be thoroughly resolved due to lack of data and because the perpetrator had passed away. The third major issue the team had to consider concerned Lily's legal identity, as returning to her true identity, after more than 50 years living under a different name, could not be accomplished simply by a verbal declaration. The investigation team coordinated with the State Vital Records Agency, victim support lawyers, and the Social Security Office to build a roadmap for legalizing her identity. First, they had to invalidate the administrative records attached to the name Mary Ellen Price once it was determined to be an identity created by the perpetrator. This included Social Security records, residency registrations, tax records, and related legal documents. In parallel, they had to restore the identity Lily Sanders, the original identity validly registered in Maryland in 1952, and link Lily's life information into the system by using current biometric data as the authentication point. These procedures were complex because the legal system does not frequently handle cases of missing persons found after more than half a century. The legalization had to ensure no legal gaps in the transition process, avoiding a situation where Lily belonged to no administrative category during the interim. Federal and state agencies chose a parallel solution, recognizing Mary Ellen Price as an identity used in civil activities, but not the original one, while re-establishing Lily Sanders as the official identity based on DNA results. This allowed Lily to continue using the accounts and civil benefits she already had, while the system would merge the two identities into a single record belonging to her true person. Beyond the legal issues, the post-reunion period also raised questions about family relationships after 53 years of separation. Although the reunion was successful and full of emotion, no one could predict how the process of rebuilding the relationship would unfold. Lily had lived her entire life with a person she believed was her mother, developing awareness, habits, and emotions under Evelyn's influence. Margaret, meanwhile, had spent her life longing for a 2-year-old child, unaware that her daughter had grown into a woman with her own life and mental scars that could hardly be erased. The victim support team recommended providing long-term psychological counseling services to help both adapt to the sudden change and to give Lily time to integrate with the family she had no memory of. Another unanswerable question was Evelyn's true feelings when raising Lily. Did she believe she was doing the right thing, or was she always aware that her actions were wrong, but hid it deep in her isolated life? No documents, no statements remained sufficient to clarify this. Evelyn's death took with it all the reasons, fears, and true motives she had never revealed. This closed the case legally, but on the human level, it left a void that no investigation could fill. The post-reunion phase was thus both a closure and an opening, closing the search journey that lasted more than half a century, but opening questions about the past that no one could answer anymore. Along with the legal, psychological, personal decisions Lily had to face as she stepped into a new life with her old name. When Lily Sanders' file was officially closed after more than 53 years since the day she disappeared from her front porch on a March morning in 1954, the case became a typical example of the power of DNA technology in solving mysteries that seemed forever unsolvable. Without Mary Ellen voluntarily submitting a DNA sample to NamUs in 2006, all documents, data, and clues related to Lily would likely have continued to lie dormant in the depths of the storage system, obscured by the administrative misclassification error in 1962, and overlooked until the last people with direct memories of the disappearance were gone. The role of DNA in this case was not only in identifying the victim's identity, but also in opening access to a file that had been misfiled for decades. Thanks to the mother-child match, the entire chain of errors, oversights, and misunderstandings could be reviewed and corrected. No witness in 1954 could describe clearly enough to lead to the perpetrator. No physical evidence retained legal value after more than half a century, and no crime scene report was detailed enough to convincingly reconstruct the events. It was DNA that reconnected the broken thread, translated Margaret's memory into scientific data, and brought Mary Ellen back to her real name. In summarizing the case, the investigation team and experts re-evaluated the entire process, spanning more than half a century, to point out the key mistakes that unnecessarily prolonged the search for Lily. The first and greatest mistake was the inaccurate assessment in the initial hours. When the 1954 patrol team assumed Lily had simply wandered off, rather than been kidnapped. As a result, they deployed a spontaneous search, disturbing the crime scene and failing to properly seal the area. Important traces, such as the location where the bracelet fell, the perpetrator's approach direction, suspicious footprints, were all obscured by the chaotic search efforts of neighbors and family. The second mistake was underestimating the testimony of a young witness, the 8-year-old boy who insisted he saw someone carrying a child. But because the account lacked details, police did not treat it as a sign of criminal activity and only noted it as supplementary information. In that context, the appearance of a strange woman at the end of the street was not taken seriously enough, partly because in that era, Few considered a female perpetrator in child abductions. The third mistake, and one assessed as the reason the case sank into oblivion, was the administrative misclassification in 1962, when Lily's file was transferred to the runaway category, a completely inappropriate category for a 2-year-old victim. This caused her file to no longer appear in state and federal priority lists, nor to be reviewed when missing children search programs expanded in the 1980s. From a historical perspective, this is one of the typical examples of how small human errors can create consequences lasting decades in the justice system. Additionally, the lack of federal coordination in the 1950s, 1970s, along with technical limitations of that era, left the case in a near impossible state for continued investigation. Clues related to the green Ford were not pursued thoroughly. Owner lists were not fully updated, and there was no long-term tracking effort to search for the possibility that Lily was being raised under a different identity. In retrospect, the investigation team concluded that if just one of these errors had been handled correctly at the time, preserving the crime scene, more thoroughly exploring the child's testimony, not misclassifying the file, the case might have been solved within the first few years, when Evelyn was still living in the area, and Lily was very young. It was the overlap of these mistakes that pushed the case into cold case status for more than half a century. Nevertheless, the Lily Sanders case also left a lasting impact on the history of missing children investigations in Maryland and the United States in general. The fact that a victim missing since age 2 was found alive after 53 years is an extremely rare event and became evidence of the value of family DNA storage, which was later mandatorily integrated into many national search systems. NamUs, which was still relatively new when Mary Ellen submitted her DNA sample, became a highly valued tool for its ability to link data across states and assist in solving cases where paper records had become useless. This case contributed to promoting new legal policies on managing missing persons files, especially for children, requiring stricter verification when classifying cases, prohibiting transfer to other categories without clear evidence, and creating mechanisms for automatic periodic DNA comparison with national databases. Additionally, the case became a textbook example in investigator training courses on the importance of the first 24 hours, caution in handling crime scenes involving missing children, and the value of not dismissing witnesses even if initial statements are incomplete. In the field of criminal psychology, Evelyn's profile is seen as a rare illustrative case of a female perpetrator kidnapping a child to raise, showing that motives may stem from personal trauma rather than traditional criminal purposes. Finally, summarizing the Lily Sanders case also carries a message beyond the legal scope that sometimes justice does not come from the speed or perfection of the system, but from the perseverance of those who never give up. A mother holding hope in silence, a grown victim daring to face questions about herself, and investigators who believe that the past, no matter how distant, deserves to be illuminated. This is the end of a 53-year journey, but also a reminder that every missing person's file carries within it an opportunity to be found, as long as there is enough time, technology, and faith to wait. The story of Lily Sanders, the child kidnapped in 1954 and found only after 53 years, thanks to DNA, is not just a family tragedy, but also a reflection of issues that still exist in American life today. Errors in the administrative system, gaps between federal and state agencies, and especially the importance of modern technology in protecting the community. From Lily's file being misclassified as runaway in 1962, to the police initially misassessing the situation, thinking the little girl had wandered off, the story reminds us that subjectivity in the first hours can change an entire person's fate. In modern America, where children are still at risk of being kidnapped by acquaintances or strangers, this lesson remains fully relevant. The community, families, and law enforcement need to be vigilant, note even the smallest suspicions, and not downplay children's testimony, like the 8-year-old boy who saw someone carrying the child, but whose statement was undervalued. Furthermore, Mary Ellen's journey as an adult, having to find documents herself, facing feelings of not belonging, and ultimately relying on DNA to reclaim her true identity, highlights the importance of clear personal records, access to information, and legal support for those with ambiguous identities. In today's society, thousands of Americans who were adopted, immigrated, or lost documents, and Lily's story reminds us that searching for origins is not just a right, but a fundamental identity need. Finally, the late reunion of Lily and her birth mother Margaret emphasizes the importance of perseverance and technological development. Without the NAMU system and modern DNA testing, the truth might have been buried forever. The lesson for us: preserve family records, proactively use technological tools to protect loved ones, and always believe that things that seem hopeless can still be answered when science and people persistently search together. Thank you for joining us through the more than half-century journey of the Lily Sanders case. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the files decoded by justice and time. See you in the next video, where we continue to illuminate mysteries that seem to have fallen asleep.